This is a video that compiles my old reviews of the 5 mainline Donkey Kong Country games. I did make these close to 3 years ago, so if the writing, editing, and my voice seem off, well, that's why. I was just starting this YouTube thing, so give me a bit of slack. I also took the opportunity to make some minor addendums and corrections. You'll know what they are because this sound effect will play. Anyways, hope you enjoy. What's the first thing you think of when you hear the term video game? What immediately pops into your head? For some, it might be a shooter, an arcade game like Space Invaders or Pac-Man, maybe a fighting game like Street Fighter, an RPG, or an adventure title like Zelda. My mind immediately jumps to platformers, in my opinion, the quintessential video game genre. The very concept is so accessible. You control a character and navigate them to the end of a level, overcoming obstacles by jumping over them, on them, or incinerating them. And for a while, platformers were like the only genre in gaming. Alright, that isn't true of course, but you get what I mean. If you were a game company in the 80s and made a game where you couldn't jump, people would look at you funny. With there being so many platformers released across the past several decades, it's a no small feat answering the question, which is the best of the bunch? I'd be crazy if I tried answering that question, but I can at least talk about a series that I believe comes close and stands tall among the greats. And in fact, one of the games in this series, the one I'll be going over today, happens to be the very first game I ever played. Yeah, my first game starred an ape. The Donkey Kong Country franchise doesn't contain a single entry that's anything below greatness. To be fair, there's only like 5 mainline games, but I consider 2 of them to be near flawless and the other 3 aren't too far behind. If anyone is wondering, no, I won't be looking at the Donkey Kong Land games, nor will I be looking at DK64. I've never played the Land games, and I feel that 64 would be out of place if I stick it in the middle of a retrospective focusing on side-scrollers. Also, knowing me, I'd want to 100% 64, and I just don't have it in me to torture myself, okay? Basically, I'm only looking at the titles that have country in the name, the Rare Trilogy and the Retro Studios Duology. For the first 3 games, I'll be reviewing the original versions. They look nicer, sound better, and to put it bluntly, I just feel like it. I'll still try to mention some of the added bonuses exclusive to the GBA versions though, especially for the first game since I did grow up with it after all. With all that out of the way, let's get this show on the road. This is the Donkey Kong Country Retrospective. Donkey Kong is one of the oldest mascot characters in gaming, clearly inspired by and partially named after the Universal monster King Kong. This actually prompted Universal to sue Nintendo for copyright infringement, a case that Nintendo won. Fun fact, Kirby was named after Nintendo's lawyer in this lawsuit, John Kirby. And here I thought he was named after the vacuum brand. DK made his video game debut when Nintendo's golden boy Shigeru Miyamoto was tasked with restructuring the arcade game Radar Scope to be more appealing to American audiences. Radar Scope then turned into Donkey Kong, where ironically Donkey Kong wasn't even the protagonist. Instead, players controlled Jumpman in a set of 4 bite-sized obstacle courses to save the damsel in distress Pauline, who's being held captive by the ape. Donkey Kong was such a huge success that a year later, Nintendo made Donkey Kong Jr., which expanded on the gameplay of the original and made Jumpman a douchebag who tries to murder a toddler. Both of these are quite fascinating to this day. I mean, you can beat them in less than 5 minutes, but they're neat distractions nonetheless, and compared to Pac-Man over there, these definitely have more meat on their bones. Donkey Kong 3 on the other hand is a very different kind of game. You play as this kid, killing bugs and blowing smoke up DK's ass. I personally couldn't get past the first level. I found it to be pretty boring. Donkey Kong 3 came out in 1983, and if you know your history, then you know that this was the start of the great video game crash caused by an oversaturation in the market of low-quality software and hardware. Looking at the majority of Atari games in the late 70s and early 80s, I'm surprised this didn't happen sooner. Nintendo is recognized as the savior of the gaming industry because they made this little doodad called the Nintendo Entertainment System and a 40 million copy selling sensation, Super Mario Bros. Nintendo essentially made Jumpman, now named Mario, the face of their company and the face of gaming as a whole. Meanwhile, Donkey Kong was probably in a landfill somewhere along with copies of E.T. and that one racing game with math. Today, that landfill is the new home of F-Zero. For the next decade or so, Donkey Kong was nowhere to be seen. Okay, that's not exactly true since they did port the 3 arcade games to the NES. The character was evidently still on Nintendo's mind, but they never made a brand new NES Donkey Kong game. A couple of years later, Sega threw their hat into the ring with the Genesis. But what about the Master System, said no one ever. The main appeal of the Genesis was its graphical fidelity. The NES had 8-bit graphics and the Genesis doubled that number to 16. I still have no idea what the hell this means, but look at the pretty colors. Nintendo retaliated in 1991 with their next-gen system, appropriately coined the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, a 16-bit powered console made to compete with that one system with all the tumors sticking out of it. Both companies went to great lengths to prove that their system was more powerful. During their quest to take down Sega, Nintendo met with British developer Rare. They had created an eye-catching boxing game demo that used pre-rendered 3D visuals. And just like that, Rare essentially became a second-party developer after Nintendo bought a large stake in the company, granting Rare full access to a number of their IPs. Likely because they felt bad for the long-forgotten icon, they decided that their first project would be a platformer starring Donkey Kong, using their experience with 3D graphics to push the SNES to its limits. Basically, everything in the game was created as a 3D model first, before being converted into a 2D sprite, and the end result is something I'll give my opinion on later. At the time, there's no doubt that this was a head-turner. A year of development later, Donkey Kong Country was released to the masses on November 21st, 1994 in the US. It sold 500,000 units in its first week alone. It proved not only to be an impressive graphical showcase for the Super Nintendo hardware, but it was also a great game on its own. I grew up playing the game on the Game Boy Advance, but even before that version, DKC was reworked into a Game Boy Color title to give portable players a slice of the pie. Not like Donkey Kong Land, which was more of a reimagining of the Country series for the original Game Boy. This was the complete DKC experience, except not really, because oh my god, it looks f***ing putrid. As I mentioned, for this video and for the next 2 videos, I'll be playing the Super Nintendo version, specifically via the Nintendo Switch Online Super Nintendo app, which holds all 3 games, because I love disgusting borders I can't turn off. Nothing a little bit of editing can't fix. I have played this game so many times. Like Super Metroid, Donkey Kong Country is a game I can never tire of. Of course, my nostalgia for it is a key factor, but if the game didn't still hold up, I would not revisit it as often as I do. It's commendable just how well these games have aged in the gameplay department. But before I get into that, there is a story to summarize, if you count Banana Theft as a story worth summarizing in the first place. The Kong family, consisting of Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, Cranky Kong, Candy Kong, and Funky Kong, live peaceful lives on DK Island. The rest of the family is probably on vacation, and I don't blame them. The big-ass factory probably makes the island smell like shit. I remember one of the first pieces of video game trivia I ever learned was that the Donkey Kong here is not the same Donkey Kong from the arcade games. This dude grew old and became Cranky Kong, making this DK Jr. Where'd I learn this? The Snake Codec Conversations in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, also known as Super Smash Bros., the encyclopedia for kids with no friends. Anyways, one night King K. Rool, the ruler of the Kremlings, sets a plan into motion to steal Donkey Kong's coveted banana hoard. Donkey Kong understandably goes ape you get it? And so he and Diddy set off on a journey to take down the Kremlin commanders and eventually King K. Rool to get their bananas back, cause apparently these other bananas aren't good enough. Truly a masterclass in storytelling. Yeah, it's silly, but it's a platformer made by Nintendo, what do you expect? There's no cutscenes to actually explain the narrative, you had to read the instruction manual for that information. You boot up the game and you're just thrown into the action without a second thought. That is, unless you're playing the GBA version, which adds cutscenes at the beginning of the game, after you beat a boss, and at the end. They're not amazing or anything, but they're a neat addition. Actually, let's talk about the GBA version for a minute. In many ways, this is the definitive version of Donkey Kong Country in terms of content, and in some cases, even production value. I already mentioned the cutscenes, but on top of that there's an added time attack mode, a hero mode that's unlocked by getting 101% where you can only play as Diddy, a better save feature, new collectibles in the form of these snapshots scattered throughout the levels for you to find, minigames hosted by Funky and Candy involving fishing and dancing respectively. Something I didn't know until doing research for this video, the Funky's fishing side game originated in the Game Boy Color port, alongside another minigame called Crosshair Cranky.
For his neutral special, he wields a gun.
Back to the GBA version. It also adds title cards for bonus rooms not unlike the ones in DKC 2 and 3, these trippy sequences when you enter a warp barrel, and likely a bunch of other stuff that I don't know about and or am too lazy to get footage of. and there are bonuses similar to these in the other 2 ports as well. With the plethora of content that the GBA versions have to offer, why did I opt to stick with the SNES versions? Well, a number of reasons. The SNES versions just feel better to play. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but they feel faster and the control is more satisfying to me. Graphically speaking, the DKC games on GBA were compromised drastically. Everything looks so bright. In some levels it could be beneficial to see where you're going, but because of that some of the atmosphere is lost. The sprite quality saw the biggest downgrade. The only reason I knew as a kid that the extra life balloons have DK's face drawn on them is because a render of them was included in a strategy guide I used to own for the game. I was 5 years old and already learning how to cheat my way through life. Seriously though, these sprites are probably the best Rare was able to do on the hardware, but they're a far cry compared to the original sprites, which was one of the selling points back in 1994. But if I had to choose the biggest reason why I prefer the SNES versions despite the lack of bonus content, it's the sound quality. The DKC soundtracks are glorious, which I will definitely talk about more during this retrospective. The GBA's sound chip does not do these songs justice. Some of them still sound pretty good, pretty much all of them were reworked with the audio constraints in mind, but it's not a sacrifice I'm willing to make anymore. These are clearly very solid and very impressive versions of these games, but I'll take the originals any day of the week even if I do have a lot of nostalgia for the GBA port. So what makes Donkey Kong Country stand out in a crowd of other great platformers from its time? You've got Mario, the standard albeit still very excellent contender with great controls, nice graphics, and memorable power-ups. There's Sonic, which emphasizes speed, physics-based gameplay to gain said speed, and huge levels chock full of goodies for you to find every time you play, for the most part. I feel that Donkey Kong Country, the series as a whole, has an identity made up of 3 main things: level variety, secrets, and difficulty. Let's work our way through each of them one at a time. Now, this isn't as obvious in the first game, but the DKC franchise does a great job at making every level feel fresh. A few may share similar themes like caverns, jungles, and factories, but no 2 levels are ever too similar that you can't tell them apart. Far from it, every level has a certain set piece, a certain gimmick that you can instantly remember and point to. And this kind of design started as early as DKC 1, though like I said, it's not as refined. Still quite a few noteworthy examples here though. Trick Track Trek and Tanked Up Trouble. Both of these levels have you riding atop a moving platform. In one you have to look out for enemies trying to Goomba stomp you from above, while in the other you have to manage the platform's fuel by collecting these fuel canisters. Clam City and Croctopus Chase. They're water levels dominated by 2 specific types of enemies: clams that can snipe you with pearls, and fast as octopi that chase you throughout the stage. Gorilla Glacier and Ice Age Alley. You make your way across perilous chasms using the infamous spinning barrels in the former and swinging ropes in the latter. This may not seem like that big of a deal, but making a game where you're able to give every stage its own personality is no easy task. I love Mario World as much as anybody else, but I have a hard time differentiating all the generic grass-themed levels from one another every now and then. That never happens to me with the Donkey Kong Country games. I may not be able to memorize all the level names, although I think it's really clever how several of them are alliterative, but I can never forget each of their gimmicks. The jungle level with all the shooting barrels, the minecart level where you jump out of the carts to avoid enemies, the temple level straight out of Indiana Jones. They are all easily identifiable, sometimes even their bonus rooms make them memorable. Like I'll always remember Oil Drum Alley as that one stage with the bonus room hidden inside another bonus room. Actually, that's a good segue into one of the other defining traits of this franchise. Secrets. Secrets everywhere. Again, this mainly applies to the sequels as they put a much greater focus on secrets. They're required to unlock optional content and in some cases different endings. Only thing you get for finding all the secrets in DKC 1 is approval from your verbally abusive father. Doesn't mean they aren't worth going over though. The levels in the DKC series reward players that take the time to examine and explore the surroundings with warp points that will take you to the end of the stage, although they are hidden extremely well, and bonus rooms filled to the brim with collectibles. Finding every bonus room in DKC 1 is required for getting 101% completion. Yes, I did say 101% because apparently 100% is for scrubs. Some get repeated, but surprisingly quite a few of them are one of a kind. However, as I mentioned, there's no big incentive for going out of your way to find them all. I never fully complete Donkey Kong Country whenever I replay it. I'll go for the bonus rooms I know the locations of by heart, but that's about it. Sometimes I'll flat out skip a bonus room because if I'm not getting anything substantial from playing through them, then they kinda just break the game's pacing. However, for this review, for the first time in my life, I did it. I found every bonus room in the first DKC game, and you know what? My point still stands, it's not worth it. The locations of some of these can be very cryptic, such as the aforementioned bonus room within the bonus room. Sometimes there'll be a trail of bananas that clue you into the whereabouts of nearby bonus rooms, but this isn't always the case. The GBA version actually has an advantage in this department, because you can actually see some of the bonus rooms that used to require leaps of faith. The most I got out of my 101% run was being absolutely swarmed with extra lives from all the bananas and balloons from the bonus rooms. Since this was my, 1000th time playing the game, this was overkill. But for a newcomer, these are most likely a godsend because of how hard these games can be. Donkey Kong Country is a platformer that assumes that you're well versed in the genre. This is great considering I didn't even know what a video game was prior to booting it up for the first time. I'm surprised I didn't develop early childhood anger issues. Compared to Mario, which, let's be fair, can provide a good challenge nearing the endgame, mainly 1 through 3 in World, DKC is much less forgiving. There's just a lot more things in these levels out to get you, ranging from flaming oil tanks, drivers going the wrong way on a one-way road, bottomless pits, and electrical issues. You've got to have quick reflexes, patience, and make split-second decisions at a moment's notice when the developers want to be cruel to you. So here's the thing, and this applies mostly to the SNES trilogy. DKC can have some good old classic bullshit design that can cause you to die more times than necessary, which significantly increases the game's difficulty. The biggest offender is the screen crunch. Graphics this detailed come at a cost, and that cost is huge character sprites that take up a bunch of screen real estate. Unless you know exactly what's ahead, there are quite a few occasions where you'll just be blindsided if you're going even remotely fast. Shoot, sometimes you don't even have a choice in how fast you want to move, leading to some sections boiling down to trial and error. This isn't as bad as I might be making it out to be, but it is a flaw that I have to comment on, and it's not going away anytime soon. But overall, the challenge in these games is fair. Most of my deaths are due to my own recklessness, because this game is not easy. I know this is incredibly ironic considering my history with the game and because part of what I try to do is convince others to play the games I cover, but I would never recommend DKC as somebody's first platformer, not even as their second or third. By the last 3 worlds, you're expected to have mastered all of the game's mechanics. Not only do the stages become increasingly more dangerous, but the Kremlin crew get a lot meaner. And a lot of the time it's the small guys that hurt the most, like these mini neckies with their super fast nut firing rate, and these jumping claptraps and loopy lights. The bigger enemies are no joke either, specifically the Crushas that come in 2 flavors. The first type can only be killed by Donkey, and the second type, exclusive to the last regular level in the game, can only be killed with barrels. And I can't stand these fuckers. They throw barrels so quickly that a lot of times I swear it must be some kind of glitch because I can just barely avoid them without getting hit. But really, it's the levels themselves that give you the most grief. The last platforming level, Platform Perils, took me, no joke, months to finish as a kid. To think I was so close to the end of the game, but these piece of shit buff crocodiles that you have to kill while standing on a small moving platform that gives way after a few seconds were my mortal enemy. If you want a prime example of how bad the screen crunch can be, look no further than Poison Pond. I always go extremely slow in this stage because you never know when a fish or squid can end your entire run without giving you a second to react. Snow Barrel Blast would probably be the hardest stage of all if not for this shortcut that I remember finding by complete accident when I was a kid, because I sucked that much at timing the barrel launches. Otherwise, you've got a long road of pain and misery ahead. Oh, and did I mention that you can only get hit once? Twice if you have both Kongs, but technically speaking, each ape has the endurance of a saltine cracker. How does this big ass gorilla lose to a tiny rat? If I'm making it sound like I hate the high challenge in these games, I don't. Quite the contrary actually, I just can't help but vent a little in these videos, you know? The combination of the difficulty along with the amazing level variety and exploration is what makes the Donkey Kong Country games so addicting and fun to me. I always want to see the next creative stage gimmick, scour each level for collectibles even when I don't get anything meaningful in return in the first game. I can't help it, man, I need my bananas. And experience that feeling of accomplishment, breathe that sigh of relief after seeing that exit sign and finally being able to stop clenching my controller with my sweaty palms. And it's all accompanied by some, while simple at first glance, very smartly thought out game mechanics to make the gameplay something worth coming back to time and time again. The Kongs control wonderfully in every DKC game, with the sole exception being Donkey Kong Country Returns, and that's in large part because of the controller. More on that at another time. Every action feels responsive, and screen crunch notwithstanding, the minute-to-minute gameplay is extremely quick. But the best thing about the gameplay is the roll. Not only is it a good way of dealing with enemies when you don't feel like jumping, but you get this big speed boost after rolling into an enemy that can be chained together with other rolls and lets you carry some serious momentum if you know where to do it. This never gets boring. It's such a basic move that proves to be incredibly useful and entertaining to pull off. The roll can also defy the laws of gravity by letting the Kongs jump out of said roll even in midair. And this isn't a glitch or anything, it's an intended maneuver that is needed to get certain items. Honestly, I think that the roll is what separates a decent player from a skillful player in Donkey Kong Country. Cause I know I rarely used the roll back then and I was dog shit at the game. Now I can't imagine playing the game without it, and it only elevates the already solid gameplay. Can't believe it's taken this long to bring focus to them, but Donkey and Diddy have some key differences that make Diddy the clear best character to use. Donkey is slower, slightly worse at jumping, and is a bigger target than Diddy. Only advantage he has is strength, meaning he can kill some select enemies by jumping on them, whereas Diddy cannot. He can also pound the ground to uncover hidden goodies. If you want to slowly and tediously check every pixel in the game for bananas and maybe a Kong letter here and there, then be my guest. In the meantime, I'll spend my time not using the most useless ability in these games. Diddy's reduced strength isn't really a handicap since he has other methods of dealing with tougher enemies. The only reason I'd consider using Donkey instead of him is when I need to carry a barrel over my head. Diddy holds barrels directly in front of him, which I prefer overall since I can just run into enemies and use the barrel as a shield. But in some rare situations, being able to throw the barrel at an arc without having to awkwardly jump is better. Along the way, the duo can get some help from other members in the Kong family. Cranky Kong gives you tips and hints regarding how to find some hidden bonus rooms when he's not beating you. Funky lets you travel between the island's 6 major areas, and Candy can save your progress. They have no impact on the core gameplay, but that's where animal buddies come in. Mario didn't get a companion until Super Mario World, but here we get 5 to help us out. Rambi the Rhinoceros can mow down enemies and bust down breakable walls with ease. He also has the most infuriating bonus game. You can play these after collecting 3 matching Animal Buddy tokens for a chance to score extra lives. Every 100 tokens is an extra life. There's a hidden giant token in each stage that doubles your current token count. So the trick is to nab as many of the smaller ones as you can before going after the big boy in the time limit. Problem is, the timer in Rambi's bonus room must be on crack because it goes down way too fast. I always just barely make it to the big token, and if you fall trying to make your way to it, then you're f***ed. On Guard the Swordfish is pretty much just underwater Rambi, though his main method of attack can be a little finicky since he does this charge automatically when he gets close to an enemy. If you aren't lined up correctly to hit the enemy with the tip of his nose though, then say goodbye to On Guard. Winky the Frog can jump really high but has miserable ground control since he's always hopping around, so jumping can feel very loose. Espresso the Ostrich can fly. Sort of, you won't gain any altitude but you can get some serious airtime nonetheless. Unfortunately, he can't kill any enemies, but at least you can ignore some of the smaller ones. Oh, never mind, I guess just when he feels like it. Finally, Squawks the Parrot only appears in torchlight trouble to light the way ahead. Just be careful not to turn around if you're playing on version 1.0 unless you want a seizure. The animal buddies are alright, they're nowhere near remarkable. There's almost never a time when I'm like, damn, I really wish I had Winky right now. And I think it's just because the Kongs do fine on their own. It'd be a different story if you could actually take them outside of the levels you find them in, but not every level is designed to accommodate every animal buddy. I always try to have Yoshi with me in Super Mario World because I can actually use him in more than 6 select stages. Also, he's great for mid-air jumps. I'm surprised that the SNES trilogy on a technical standpoint holds up as well as it does. Like, I don't think the original Mortal Kombat games look very good by today's standards, though that may be because they went for a more realistic approach with their visuals than the silly Ape game did. But Donkey Kong Country not only looks damn impressive, but it also sounds fantastic. Visually, they struck a great balance between 2D and 3D, where you can tell that these sprites all started off as 3D renders, but there wasn't a whole lot that was compromised when they had to be made into 2D assets. The backgrounds are really nice, environments pack a lot of detail, some stages have cool effects that simulate different times of day and weather conditions. But what I'm a really big fan of is how Rare injected a lot of this game's charm through the animation. The Kongs have different reactions when they win and lose bonus games, they do a little dance after completing a level, they lose balance when close to an edge. Even the enemies have a lot of personality. A lot of that is in their death animations, but hey, it's amusing. The bosses were given more attention animation-wise, and that's all the praise they'll be getting from me, cause not counting the final boss, they're pathetically easy. Seriously, one of them just gives up. I'm getting close to wrapping things up, so it's time to gush about the soundtrack. And just like a couple of other things I've talked about, the soundtrack in DKC 1 is noticeably weaker when compared to the soundtracks in the sequels. Oh, it's still really good, which should speak for the quality of future music. It's just that this game's OST is mostly made up of atmospheric pieces. The songs are relatively subdued, and that vibe suits this game fairly well considering the settings don't get too crazy. This is music that's fitting for jungles, caves, and snowy mountains. If you've seen my Metroid videos though, you probably know I just prefer more upbeat songs, especially in platformers. Doesn't mean I don't appreciate and even adore some of the melodies here. Aquatic Ambience is one of the best songs in the entire series and one of the best water level themes in all of gaming. Life in the Mines, amazing tune. Misty Menace, super creepy. Fear Factory, an absolute banger. David Wise did an outstanding job, and the highlight of his work is Gangplank Galleon. It starts off as the most generic pirate song you could imagine, but then it morphs into this epic arrangement fitting for a final battle. Such a great beat and use of the electric guitar. And now that I've brought him up, King K. Rool is such a cool villain. He has an unforgettable design with a menacing aura to him. This man towers over the Kongs, and he doesn't pull any punches. Without a doubt, the only truly great boss fight in this game, made even better by the fake out ending that I remember caught me so off guard the first time I fought him. When I finally beat him for real though so many years ago, it was surreal. It took me about 1 year, maybe closer to 2 years, to beat Donkey Kong Country, and yes, this was also the first game I ever finished. I felt so proud of myself, and for the first time in my life, I experienced that oh so bittersweet feeling one gets when they beat a game they fall in love with. And to this day, I love Donkey Kong Country. It has held up sensationally well, barring a couple of janky bits here and there, no doubt caused by hardware limitations, but in spite of its minor flaws, it is still a very respectable 2D platformer with great gameplay, incredibly solid design, and outstanding production values. Like, no joke guys, the music in these games is so good. If anything, just go out and listen to the soundtrack. Oh. And while I think the final battle theme is the best song overall, my personal favorite is, and always will be, the one playing in the background right now, Credit Concerto, the song that played when I completed my first video game, and the first video game song to give me goosebumps. Donkey Kong Country holds a special place in my heart, and I hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble about it. Next time we meet, I'll be looking at Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest. I've talked about just how much the original Donkey Kong Country means to me. As an introduction, or more like a gateway drug into the world of video games, it did its job well enough, and I see it as a quality 2D platformer even in the modern day. But it does falter in a few areas. Some ideas aren't fully realized, the bosses leave a lot to be desired, and the game doesn't give you much of a reason to look for all the secrets it has hidden. Thankfully, due to its commercial success, Rare immediately began working on a sequel to address those shortcomings and improve upon the foundation they set. And when I say immediately, I mean immediately. Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest came out just a year later. When you look at how long games take to come out today because game companies just have to add 5 more polygons to Aloy's teeth, the time between game releases in the 80s and 90s is almost hard to believe. And I know these games aren't as complex as a big AAA open world game, but every game, no matter the scope, takes a lot of work and time to make. I just hope the workers at Rare were able to maintain a good work-to-life balance during this period. Not only did DKC 2 come out a year after the first game, but the third game launched a year after the second, and then there's all the projects they worked on for the N64. And what's truly astonishing is that in spite of only having 1 year to develop it, Rare didn't compromise on anything with Donkey Kong Country 2. It is better than the original in just about every conceivable way. And when I think about perfect video game sequels, Diddy's Conquest always comes to mind. So let's continue the DKC retrospective by looking at Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest. And it's Diddy's Conquest, not Diddy Kong's Quest. It's supposed to be a pun, damn it, get it right. As I mentioned last time, I'm gonna be focusing on the SNES version. Unlike DKC1, DKC2 didn't get a Game Boy Color port, but it did get a Game Boy Advance port. Pretty much the same song and dance as the first game's GBA version. It looks and sounds a little worse than the SNES version, but it makes up for it by offering a way to play this amazing game on the go and including some extra minigames and collectibles. This version does add a new boss for the campaign though, and I've gotta say, it does not look good graphically. I don't know if it's just me, but it looks very cheap and moves in this animatronic-like fashion compared to every other boss that's animated with such fluidity. Again, if you don't mind the things you lose from making the transition to the handheld version, this is a good way to play Donkey Kong Country 2. Unlike Donkey Kong Country 1, I didn't grow up with the second game, or the third game for that matter. I didn't even know the sequels existed until many years later. Pretty much not until I became more internet savvy when my parents got us our first computer. It was also on this computer that I first played and beat the game using an emulator. I know, I've brought up emulators and emulation a lot on this channel, but it was the method I used back then to play so many classic games. Back when I didn't own a Wii to buy virtual console titles and when I didn't want my parents to spend their hard-earned money on ancient hardware. Don't worry, I paid for my sins by having to play on a keyboard. I know I said I didn't play Metroid Fusion until it was out on the Wii U Virtual Console because of how much I hated using a keyboard to control a 2D game, but I pushed through with DKC2 because it was the sequel to the first game I ever played. I wanted to see what I had been missing out on. In terms of the story, I wasn't missing out on much. The first game set a new standard for video game storytelling by telling a gripping tale of two monkeys trying to get their bananas back from an obese crocodile. DKC2 expands on that by telling a gripping tale of two monkeys trying to save one of their own from an obese crocodile, cause they don't want to give up their bananas again. As expected, the story is unimportant. More than anything, it's an excuse to change the game's setting from DK Island to Crocodile Isle. All you need to know is you control Diddy Kong and Dixie Kong and make your way through the island's 6 major areas to save Donkey Kong, who's currently being tortured by Captain K. Rool with cannonballs right to the f***ing abdomen at point blank range. When you look at it that way, this uppercut after you save him is quite justified. Diddy's Conquest, as the title suggests, puts Diddy in the spotlight. You can't play as Donkey Kong at all in this game. Instead, Dixie replaces him as your partner in crime, and these two are a much better duo. Diddy hasn't changed much from the first game, just as fast and nimble as ever. But Dixie has the best ability you could ask for in any platformer. She can float indefinitely. Do I have to explain why this is so good? Unsure whether or not you'll make a jump? Use Dixie. Don't want to get blindsided by a potential hazard below you? Use Dixie. Playing Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Conquest for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System? Use Dixie. Okay, I'm kinda joking about that last part, but Dixie Kong is a fan favorite for a reason. Being able to float makes platforming easier and gives you more opportunities to explore and find those elusive bonus rooms and DK coins, which I'll get into later. However, although Dixie is my favorite character to play as, Diddy isn't made completely useless by her existence like with the dynamic between the Kongs in DKC1. I still prefer using Diddy when holding barrels and other objects since Dixie mimics Donkey's overhead carrying stance. That's one strong ass ponytail. Diddy's cartwheel is also more reliable and better at building speed than Dixie's twirl. I also think Diddy is a bit quicker on his feet but has a slightly lower max jump height compared to Dixie. Adding to the improved synergy of the Kongs is the option to team up. Either Diddy or Dixie can carry the other on their backs and throw them at enemies as a long-range attack or grab collectibles that are out of reach. The best thing about this is that you will automatically move to wherever your buddy lands, so it can be used as a way to reach high ledges or phase through obstacles. Be careful where you throw your buddy though, as the game will still count them as getting hit if they touch spikes and zingers and whatnot. And just like DKC1, one hit and that Kong is out until you find a DK barrel. So yeah, watch out. So, you can float now. That must mean the game is easier, right? Donkey Kong Country 2 ramps up pretty much everything, including the difficulty. To start off, there's so much more going on in these stages. Now there's a whole bunch of different types of controllable barrels, rope climbing a la the Donkey Kong Jr. arcade game, crocodile head trampolines, bouncy tires, hot air balloons, sticky honeycomb walls, rising acid, stupid wind, and a lot more where that came from. The levels are considerably bigger and the new gimmicks prove to be more dangerous than the ones in DKC1. The levels with Bramble are infamous as being some of the most challenging in the entire game since nearly every bit of the environment is deadly to the touch. Don't worry, we'll get to this one. Enemies in the first game were largely static. A select few were a little annoying to deal with, but most of them didn't do more than pace back and forth. DKC2 introduces new Kremlings that pose a bigger threat. Cloaks like throwing shit at you. Clobbers charge at you and can knock you into pits, which may or may not have prompted me to use the Switch Online Rewind feature once. The yellow ones can take your bananas, the black ones can take your freaking lives, and the TNT ones tap into their inner kamikaze and try to take you down with them. Cutlasses are mean little shits. They get straight to the point and try to slice you up with their swords as soon as they spot you. This time around, clumps try to shoot you with big ass cannonballs. Zingers have a new red variant that can't be killed, and this game loves spamming these as you get further into the adventure. Lockjaw is one of the nastiest foes you'll come across. He's pretty much the equivalent of Big Bertha from Mario 3. Avoid the water in the levels he's in, otherwise you're almost guaranteed to lose a Kong. The bosses are also more aggressive now. They're still pretty easy, but most of them involve a bit more strategy than just attack, evade, rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. The fight against Cudgel could have been cut down a bit if you ask me though. As it is, it's quite repetitive. K. Rool is the hardest and most complex boss by a mile once again. Some of his attacks don't even hurt you, they just handicap you in certain ways to test how well you can adapt to things such as slow motion or reverse controls. What I love is that the increase in difficulty is merely a consequence of Rare trying to spice the game up with better enemy and level design. It is a hard game, but just like the first game, it's hard in a good way. It isn't cheap and is light on the bullshit, but unfortunately there is still a bit of bullshit to be found. Specifically, I think the screen crunch is more egregious in DKC2. There's more occasions where leaps of faith are pretty much mandatory. Black Ice Battle immediately comes to mind. Compounding this issue is the game's greater emphasis on verticality and its level design, so simply jumping or dropping down in some stages presents a greater risk. But even largely horizontal levels have more sucker punch moments than the first game, such as On Guard section and Animal Antics, and pretty much the entirety of Screech's sprint where going slow isn't really an option. These moments are few and far between though. You forgive it all after remembering what the other 99% of DKC2 does well. DKC1 played things relatively safe with where the game took place. It's very vanilla. Diddy's Conquest is a lot less restrained in its settings and themes. It's a lot wackier and more interesting in my opinion. The game really plays up the whole pirate motif. King K. Rool has been rebranded as Captain K. Rool, and pretty much all the Kremlings follow the pirate dress code as well. The levels you run through don't just stick to your typical ship decks though. They can range from crystal mines, volcanoes, swamps, beehives, carnivals, medieval castles, and every now and then something more familiar. To me, DKC2 is the true start of this series' magical way of taking some level aesthetic that's shared among 2 or 3 stages and crafting something new out of it in each one. DKC1 laid the groundwork, but the sequel takes this idea and runs with it. Here's an easy example. There's 3 carnival roller coaster levels, essentially the minecart levels of this game, but you couldn't possibly confuse them with each other because of what you do in them. Target Terror has you hitting switches to open gates along the track. You race against 10 other contestants in Rickety Race for first place. Apparently killing the competition isn't illegal in the world of Donkey Kong Country. You manage a countdown timer in Haunted Hall by hitting the plus barrels and avoiding the minus barrels. Otherwise, Cackles here gives you a hug, and if I've learned anything from playing Elden Ring, don't accept hugs in video games. I can list other examples like that one for basically every type of level found in DKC2. I'd be here a lot longer than what's probably necessary if I were to do that, so I'll assume you guys get the gist. You're obviously all intellectuals, you're watching a YouTube review about a 27-year-old game. There's rarely a moment of dullness here. It would actually be easier for me to talk about the stages I'm not a big fan of. Red Hot Ride, Bramble Blast, and Fiery Furnace stand out as the only 3 levels that bore me. They go on for too long, so their respective gimmicks overstay their welcome. After the 5th maze of barrel cannons in Bramble Blast, I just want to launch myself into the bramble. Other than those 3, I can't stress enough just how much I love a lot of these other levels. The mines have to be my absolute favorites, the backgrounds are mesmerizing, and the music is godly. There's so many moving parts with the metal clanking, the synth, the humming. If heaven sounds a certain way, I'm pretty sure it sounds like this. And that goes for pretty much the rest of the soundtrack. The energy of this OST lines up with the more adventurous tone that characterizes Diddy's Conquest. Less of a focus on natural ambience and more of a focus on songs that make me want to get up and dance. The Rareware logo theme and the title theme prepare you for the rest of this game's phenomenal score. Welcome to Crocodile Isle captures the feeling of dread from being in an unknown, menacing location. Token Tango is a super catchy, jazzy rendition of Jungle Hijinks, perfect for a fast-paced bonus game. Lockjaw's Saga adds to the immersion of exploring the dark, underwater depths of a sunken ship hold. When you need a breather, Cranky's Conga makes you feel safe and at home, as long as you ignore the blows to your self-esteem being delivered by this old fart. Ouch. In a snowbound land, nothing like a soothing melody with hints of chimes and bells to remind me of winter. Hothead Bop, Snaky Chanty, Flight of the Zinger, Disco Train, Forced Interlude, I can't get enough of this soundtrack. The entire thing, it is right up there among my favorite game soundtracks of all time. The quality of these arrangements alone can be enough to keep someone playing. And then there's the fan favorite, Sticker Brush Symphony. Personally, I'm more of a fan of Mining Melancholy, but this song is fan-freaking-tastic. I was so moved the first time I heard it that I remember I stopped playing for a few minutes just to take in that wonderful melody. The remix in Brawl is nowhere near as good. I actually didn't even know it was a remix until I listened really closely, but it isn't bad. Just wanted to mention that because I know that song gets a lot of hate for how different it is. Also, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I like Crocodile Cacophony a little more than Gangplank Galleon. Gangplank Galleon will always be K. Rool's theme, but as a final boss song, Crocodile Cacophony just barely beats it for me. And I was so happy when I found out that it was getting a remix in Ultimate. It didn't disappoint. Can you believe I'm not even done going over new gameplay mechanics yet? Animal Buddies make a comeback in DKC 2. Espresso and Winky didn't make the cut, but there's new ones to make up for their exclusion, and now all of them have new special moves. Returning from the first game are Rambi, On Guard, and Squawks. Rambi and On Guard haven't seen much change, and they both have the same special move, a charge. Just plow through enemies at breakneck speeds or use it to reveal hidden passages. Meanwhile, Squawks retired from his old job of being, you know, an epilepsy trigger. You can actually control him now, and you have complete freedom in terms of where you want to fly. For offense, he shoots big fat nuts. Yes, I intentionally phrased that to be as suggestive as possible. Hey, this game did it first. There's a level called Squawk's Shaft for crying out loud. On to the newcomers. Rattly the Snake is a much better version of Winky. Think of him like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh, just as lovable and goofy looking. Like Winky, he can jump higher than the Kongs can on their own, but unlike Winky, controlling him isn't so much of a pain. There's still a hint of awkwardness since he does little hops whenever you move him, but the same rules for rolls apply to the hops, allowing you to jump in midair to save yourself just in case. His special move lets him charge up for an even higher jump. Quawks the Parrot is Squawks' less cool cousin. He only shows up in one level and functions as a parachute, a role that was kind of already filled by Dixie, but whatever, we'll be seeing more of him next time. Because Rare couldn't help themselves, Squawks' old job has been filled by Glimmer the Anglerfish. Pretty much identical to what Squawks did in DKC 1, not much more to say, he only appears in one level as well. Clapper the Seal gets to shine in 2 levels. In Lava Lagoon, he cools the hot water so the Kongs can safely swim through it. In Clapper's Cavern, he freezes the water for you to walk on to avoid Lockjaw's wrath. He's a very underrated animal buddy, situational but useful, and I really like his character design. Look at this good boy. That's a good boy. Finally, DKC 2 gives us the best animal buddy in the entire series, Squitter the Spider. He has the lowest jump in the game, but that doesn't mean jack when his signature move lets him make his own platforms out of webs. You can only have out 2 at a time, creating a third one makes the oldest one disappear. But that's all you need to make every bottomless pit your bitch. And you can expect there to be lots of secrets and stages that have Squitter. The designers want you to explore every nook and cranny with him. Did I mention he has a projectile attack too? I adore Squitter. Animal buddies in DKC 2 are awesome. It really speaks volumes just how much better the new ones are when 2/3 of the veterans are my least favorite of the pack. And not only can you ride some of the animals as before, but now you can become them. Some levels make you play as a certain animal buddy almost exclusively, and I'm a really big fan of this. It gives them even more of a chance to show off their gameplay style and presents creative level design explicitly tailored for their capabilities. I said we'll get to it later. In the meantime, I need to talk about one of my biggest pet peeves about Diddy's Conquest, the banana coins. These are your currency that you can spend in exchange for the services provided by the other members of the Kong family. Cranky Kong is just as full of himself as ever. He cuts back on the physical beatings and leans more towards belittling you at every opportunity, and breaking the fourth wall more often than Deadpool.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
He still offers his wisdom at least, for a price. Funky also charges you now if you want to travel to another world. That's not very funky. Swanky Kong and Wrinkly Kong make their debut here. Swanky is a game show host who tests your knowledge and awareness with trivia questions. He charges 1 banana coin for the easiest quiz, 2 for the middle one, and 3 for the hardest. And every world has a new set of quizzes for you to try. You have to closely pay attention to small background details throughout the game if you want to answer some of these questions without a guide. In return, he'll reward you with extra life balloons, with more being rewarded depending on the quiz's difficulty. Wrinkly is the head of the most prestigious Ivy League school in the world, Kong College, an institution where you could likely prove that 2 plus 2 does not equal 4 judging by the equations written on the chalkboard. She can save your progress and also offers hints, both of which cost banana coins, by the way. Yes, even the save feature. Look, banana coins are not hard to come by. You'll find a lot of them as you play even if you aren't the explorative type. Also, the first save in every world is given to you for free, which is nice. I just have to question, is charging banana coins for something as basic as a save feature necessary? What's the point if the coins aren't hard to obtain? I also don't like that you lose all your banana coins when you reload a save. I actually forgot about this and decided to rewind again, because I didn't feel like going into a level just to look for some banana coins to pay Funky to take me to another world. These are very tiny nitpicks, I'm aware. And really, I understand having to pay for Swanky's game show and for Cranky and Wrinkly's tips. And you'd only really need tips if you're a first time player hellbent on getting 102% completion, because apparently 101% is for scrubs. Greg Mayles, the lead designer for this game, stated that one of his goals for the sequel was to make exploration one of its defining traits. Last time I said that while I appreciated the first game's effort in that department, the lack of an incentive to explore didn't do it any favors. That has been completely fixed here. Simply looking for and finding the secrets is even more fun. Some can still be a bit too cryptic for my liking, but the aforementioned hints you can pay for, and the thoughtful touch of marking fully completed levels with an exclamation mark and DK coin icon are super helpful. The exclamation mark thing is also in the first game, by the way. I just forgot to bring it up then. Keep your eyes peeled and on the lookout for anything suspicious when looking for secrets. The designers did things like place a single random banana to clue you in on a hidden barrel cannon, hook, or they straight up spell out for you what you need to do to find something that's nearby. If you see a cannonball, there's a cannon nearby that you have to take it to gain entry to a bonus room. Enemies will sometimes hold the answer on how to find a secret. Literally. This cloak here, for example, tosses a chest with a cannonball inside if you wait long enough. There are 2 main collectibles required for 102% completion, Creme Coins and DK Hero Coins. You get Creme Coins after beating a boss or completing a bonus room. Simply finding the bonus rooms isn't enough anymore. Now you have an objective spelled out on the screen when you enter one. There isn't a lot of variety in these objectives. Collect all the stars, kill all the enemies, find the coin is about all you're gonna get. But every single bonus room has a unique layout. They follow the same design philosophy that I praised about the regular stages, and they are extremely memorable, fast-paced, and fun to solve. My favorites are the ones where you have to switch between Diddy and Dixie to get to the coin. It helps that you aren't doomed if you mess up in a bonus room. You can backtrack and retry unless you literally can't backtrack like in the roller coaster stages. It's a shame that the Kongs no longer celebrate or get upset when they win or lose bonus games, but this game has that trademark rareware charm in pretty much every other area that it's easy to overlook. As for the DK coins, exactly 1 is hidden in every regular level. Again, you've got to pay close attention to what's around you if you want to find some of them. My least favorite are the ones being held hostage by the end of level target. You have to time when you hit the target just right. F up and you have to do the whole stage again for another crack at it. Look at this, it's there for a couple of frames. Alright, so the bonus rooms are a lot of fun, and the Creme coins and DK coins are so irresistibly shiny that you'd be crazy not to go after them. But that doesn't address the main topic of concern here. What's the point of doing all this? Well, after you beat Captain K. Rool and save Donkey Kong, Cranky will reveal his top 3 video game heroes, apparently ranked by the number of DK coins they were able to find. Link is number 3 with 19 coins, Yoshi's at number 2 with 29, and Mario's just laughing it up at the top with 39 DK coins. No matter what, you cannot beat Mario with the number of DK coins you can find on the main part of the island. There's only 34. That's where the Creme coins come in, which, may I remind you, you get from completing bonus stages. Klubba here is a rogue Kremling, offering you passage to the Lost World if you pay him 15 Creme coins. He can be found in every regular world aside from the first, and each of his kiosks takes you to a different level in the Lost World. There's 75 Creme coins in total. Do a bit of math and you realize that there's 5 unlockable levels here. Boom, that's it, right there. For finding all the Creme coins in conjunction with all the DK coins, the rest of which are on the Lost World stage's bonus rooms and the final one is obtained from winning the true final fight against Captain K. Rool, well, more like a glorified endurance test. Point is, for doing this, I get more stages added to an already amazing package and a chance to shit on Mario, that cheeky bastard. The Lost World holds some truly rage-inducing levels though. Well, more like one rage-inducing level, Animal Antics, where you switch between the 5 playable animal buddies, sorry Quacks, in one big relay marathon. Apparently some people think Screech's sprint is harder, but I've never found it to be that bad, and Animal Antics wouldn't be either. But then you get to the squawk section. DKC2 takes a cue from the worst mainline Mario game and makes high-speed win the gimmick in a section full of bramble. Not only do you have to dodge enemies and all these thorny weeds, try doing that when the f***ing wind keeps changing direction and messes up your timing. Is it unfair though? Probably not, but there's no denying that it's very annoying, and it's not even the end of the stage. You still have the Rattly segment to finish. Imagine dying here after just barely escaping the squawks portion with your sanity intact. Hopefully it's still intact. If you can beat this level without any deaths, you deserve a freaking medal. My grudge against Animal Antics aside, how much more praise can I possibly give this game? Donkey Kong Country 2 is a step up in pretty much every way. Even as a standalone game, ignoring its status as a sequel, it checks off every box on my list of must-haves in a 2D platformer and does so with flying colors. I'll always have more of an attachment to DKC1, but I'd be a fool to let that get in the way of me labeling DKC2 as the better game. It is a must-play for platforming enthusiasts and will continue to entertain me with its superb design for years to come. I see it as Rare's magnum opus. They made great games after this, no doubt, but Diddy's Conquest is just so solid that it's my favorite of their work. Must I comment on the graphics? They're just as, if not more impressive than they were in the last game. We'll find out what happens after the secret ending next time in the Donkey Kong Country retrospective when we look at Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Cheating is fun. Donkey Kong Country 2 is considered by many, including yours truly, to be one of the best 2D platformers of all time. Every little thing about that game is solid, and it's very difficult to find real flaws that don't amount to small nitpicks that don't really matter. Making a sequel to DKC2 was just as daunting as making a sequel to Mario 3 or A Link to the Past. How the hell did Rare do it? Well, it only took them a year once again to develop the third entry in the DKC franchise, titled Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. You can consider DKC3 the Super Nintendo's swan song since the Nintendo 64 came out that very same holiday season in North America. This is probably what caused the game to not sell quite as well as its predecessors and not be played by as many people, myself included. I mentioned in the last video that while I didn't grow up with the DKC sequels, I eventually experienced the second game on an emulator. But when I finished Diddy's Conquest for the first time, I didn't jump into Dixie Kong's Double Trouble right away. Gosh, this subtitle's a mouthful. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I was too preoccupied with discovering my loves for RPGs around this time that I wasn't as interested in checking out the third game. I didn't play DKC3 until it came out on the Wii U Virtual Console, and until this review, that was my one and only playthrough. I got the most out of it that I could though. I fully completed it like I did when I first played DKC2, and I had a really good time with the game overall. But while I've gone back to replay the first two entries many times over the years, I've neglected this one for some reason. Maybe it's because in the back of my mind, this game's reputation kept me from revisiting it. Donkey Kong Country 3 is known as the black sheep of the series, but I never actually found out why. I just knew folks preferred the other titles for whatever reason. And like I said, I really enjoyed that first playthrough. Not as much as DKC2 mind you, but nothing about it was worthy of black sheep status to me. Because of this, I have been looking forward to this video the most. So let's just cut right to the chase. It was only appropriate for Rare to make a GBA version for this game to give the trilogy a proper send-off on the console. Not much more to be said that I haven't already said. There are similar compromises and additions here as there were in the other GBA ports, so I didn't spend much time playing this one since I want to put most of my focus on the original as usual. Although I will mention that GBA players get a brand new world not present on the SNES, so that's pretty cool. However, thanks to a comment I got from one Hans Gretel, I decided to go out of my way and listen to some songs from this version's soundtrack. And dude, thank you for bringing this to my attention because this OST is freaking incredible. Unlike the other two ports that basically tried to emulate the original soundtracks using a vastly inferior sound chip, resulting in music that wasn't nearly as pleasing to the ears, lead composer David Wise was instead told to redo the OST for DKC 3 GBA, and the result is one of the most underrated soundtracks on the Game Boy Advance. At least I'm pretty sure it's underrated. I mean, the game itself is already underrated, so I think it's a safe bet. At the risk of jumping the gun and revealing my thoughts on the SNES version's music, the music in the GBA version is a lot more energetic and, pardon the pun here, funky in my opinion, and it doesn't sound bad at all despite the audio constraints, which makes sense because this was the entire reason why David Wise recomposed the OST in the first place. And apparently trying to get the SNES songs to work on the GBA would cause units to catch fire? I guess that's what they mean when they call certain songs bangers. Honestly, if I hadn't already set up these reviews in a way that restricted me to play the SNES versions only, I probably would have played the GBA port of this game for this video. If you still aren't keen on the idea of playing with a slight graphical downgrade, at the very least look up the songs online. Again, thank you Hans for effectively adding a full minute to this video's runtime. Alright, time for the story.
That's it?
Donkey Kong Country has the empty banana horde in the first level. Donkey Kong Country 2 has the letter from K. Rool in that game's first level that pretty much spells out all you need to know. Donkey Kong Country 3 has nothing. Really. Not even the GBA version has a cutscene at the beginning anymore. How dare this game make me do research. Set after the events of Diddy's conquest, one day Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong mysteriously disappear while they were out exploring a region called the Northern Hemisphere, or as I like to call it, Canada. Seeing as now both of the original heroes are missing, Dixie Kong is volunteered to head off on a new adventure to find them, accompanied by her cousin Kiddy Kong, who may or may not have volunteered. The likelier scenario is that Funky just wanted to get rid of him cause... look at him. What, do you want to change his diaper? It turns out that Donkey and Diddy were kidnapped by a new enemy this time.
Chaos!
He's a robot and has assumed command of the Kremlin since King K. Rool is nowhere to be found. Never mind, there he is. After defeating Baron K. Rulenstein, okay, the first and fourth members of the DK crew are saved, and that's the end of Dixie Kong's double trouble. Don't worry, we'll get to the giant banana bird later. Not much more complicated than the other stories we've seen. What makes it interesting is that the two characters you'd expect to be at the forefront of this game are missing from action until the very end. And you know, that may also be why this game is not as popular as the first two DKC games. Dixie Kong is well liked but nowhere near as well known as Donkey or Diddy. So yeah, in Donkey Kong Country 3 you play as Dixie Kong and newcomer Kiddy Kong for the whole journey. Like with Diddy last time, Dixie hasn't seen any big changes. Her hair twirl is still super useful for getting past tough platforming challenges, and she still holds throwable items above her head as before. Kiddy Kong is essentially this game's Donkey Kong. He's slow, has a low jump, is stronger than Dixie in the 2 or 3 times where that actually matters, and notably heavier, which is good to know when looking for secrets. Kiddy is alright. I don't have a vendetta against him or anything like that. A lot of people straight up dislike this character, and yeah, I'm not particularly a fan of his design either, but that's not enough for me to hate him. My main issue with Kiddy is he doesn't really have a stake in this adventure. His reason for being here is, well, I don't know why he's here. In the first game, Donkey and Diddy are best buddies, so they help each other out in trying to get the banana horde back. In the second game, Diddy wants to rescue said best buddy, and Dixie understandably wants to lend her boyfriend a hand on this dangerous mission. In the third game, who gives a f? Here's an overweight toddler who can somehow bounce on water, have fun. Comparing the protagonists of each game, this duo doesn't look as attractive. I do prefer Dixie and Kiddy together over Donkey and Diddy in a gameplay sense. The kid's ability to bust through weak terrain and I guess the water hop thing makes him more fun to play as than Donkey to me. But there's something weird about this pairing that I can't quite put into words. This is all inconsequential though, it doesn't hurt the game's quality in the slightest. Kiddy Kong isn't the worst thing in the world. He's not as memorable as the other Kongs, but I don't mind his inclusion. Donkey Kong Country 3 borrows a lot from Donkey Kong Country 2. In fact, if I had to describe DKC 3 in a nutshell, I'd say it's basically a lesser DKC 2, but not by a whole lot. It retains a lot of the aspects that I adored about the prequel, but it fumbles a bit in a few points just enough for me to not like it quite as much. For starters, I don't think this game leaves a good first impression. When I started playing through the game again for this review, I was getting concerned. The first world, gameplay-wise mind you, did not captivate me in the slightest. The level design in the beginning stages is bland. Please let me know if I'm being too harsh, but most of the levels in the first area boil down to straight lines with not a lot standing in your way. Even bonus rooms in these stages are often in plain view, as if no effort was put into hiding them. The mill levels are exceptions, but if this kept up for the rest of the game, you know, only getting 2 standout levels per world, I was afraid I'd have to make a fairly negative video. Fortunately, to my relief, that wasn't the case. Starting in World 2, DKC3 delivers quality stages on par with some of the best from DKC2. It's astonishing how much this game improves after beating the first boss, and while I have mostly positive things to say from here on out, I do have to dock DKC3 some points for having an unexciting opening. I mean it guys, Lakeside Limbo, Tidal Trouble, and especially Skidda's Row are super boring. I was on autopilot when going through these, and I hate that they're right at the beginning because they can potentially make new players stop right here thinking that this is all there is to look forward to. But things only go up from here, trust me. Riverside Race, Ripsaw Rage, and Lightning Lookout are some of the funnest levels in the whole trilogy. They have challenging gimmicks that I've come to look forward to from the Donkey Kong Country franchise. And one thing I will commend every level for is their environments. After playing the trilogy back to back, I've come to the conclusion that DKC3 is the best looking of the 3. The new character sprites are super detailed, and as I said, the level environments are stunning. Since this game is set in Canada, I mean the Northern Hemisphere, the settings take heavy inspiration from the real world's Pacific Northwest, for example. And come on, how can you not think of Canada when looking at some of these level themes, like the waterfalls, riverbanks, and the forest where you're literally being chased by a giant saw in one of them? You could argue that this is a step back from the areas you explored in DKC2 that deviated from the generic natural environments that made up the majority of the first game's art design. But these stages' environments are so detailed and colorful and straight up beautiful that I don't care. The caves look infinitely more appealing than they did in DKC1, and what better way to bring back the vertical level design from the second game than by building the cliff levels around it. And again, DKC3 follows the tradition of giving every level a unique identity. You can be dealing with reverse controls in one of the sewer levels and zooming at unsafe speeds through the pipes in another. In Fireball Frenzy, you go through a factory while avoiding fireballs being launched by these new carbine enemies into the foreground. A really cool looking effect, by the way. And in Blazing Bazookas, you have to deal with bazooka enemies that shoot all kinds of different barrels for you to bounce off of to get through the stage. Speaking of the factories and industrial settings in general, DKC3 is filled with all these mechanical, robotic elements as well. I find that to be pretty cool, but I wish it was used more. The Zingers, for example, have been mechanized. You won't find a single regular Zinger on your journey. But most of the other Kremlings haven't received the same types of upgrades. I wish it was like DKC2 where the returning baddies were altered even if just a little in some cases to fit with the game's pirate theme. I guess you can say that this keeps things more varied, it keeps you on your toes while playing because you don't know what you'll run into. But that means it's not as easy to classify one singular trope Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is going for. It's more of a hodgepodge of a bunch of ideas, which gives me the impression that Rare probably couldn't decide on a fixed direction for the game. I've gotta say, the thing that disappointed me the most about Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, at least the SNES version, was the soundtrack. I had a hard time getting any of these songs to stick as I played. I'm not a music expert, so I don't always know how to describe exactly what I enjoy and don't enjoy about music, but a lot of the music tracks in DKC3 are nothing more than background noise to me. Most of the time, there's nothing in these arrangements for me to remember and latch onto. The instrumentation sounds nice, there's nothing wrong with the OST in that way, but the majority of it is forgettable, I'm sorry. The only songs that really stood out to me were the ones that I would listen to over and over again, such as the Overworld theme and the Bonus Room theme. Nuts and Bolts is the only one from the regular levels that made me go, this sounds really good. Everything else is just there. David Wise was joined by Evelyn Fisher when composing the game's music, who also co-composed for the first game soundtrack alongside Wise and Robin Beanland. I guess they just weren't feeling it as much when working on DKC3, which is a shame. Like I mentioned earlier, the GBA version has a much better soundtrack in my opinion. It's more my jam. The bonus theme in that version is not something I care for a whole lot though. The original one is my favorite in this case. Now that we're on that topic, bonus rooms make a return for the third time and they are extremely similar to the ones in DKC2, right down to the objectives. The only new bonus game objective this time has you collecting a certain number of green bananas to make the bonus coin appear. And I'm not a big fan of this one, only because some of these are extremely strict. If you don't get a green banana quickly, it will disappear and will likely spawn in another location, wasting time. As a matter of fact, where the bananas spawn is completely random. Sometimes the next one will appear so far away that it's nearly impossible to reach it since you're also trying to avoid shit that can hurt you and prematurely end the game, while other times they can appear right on top of you. The thought of speedrunning the 103% category of this game terrifies me. As a whole, the bonus rooms are a lot less forgiving this time around. It could be because I'm not very familiar with them, but I had to retry a bunch of these more times than I can count. Some are flat out cruel, like the one where you're riding the toboggan and have to collect every star. If you miss just one, you're out of luck, you're not getting the bonus coin. To go on a short tangent here, all of the toboggan levels suck. They increase the speed of the vehicle, and thanks to that lovely screen crunch I've brought up in the other reviews, avoiding the obstacles is a nightmare. I'll take the minecarts and roller coaster stages over these in a heartbeat. Kongfu's Cliffs also has a major screen crunch issue. I'm looking at the top of the screen the entire time and a copter will still pass by and kill me. Back to the bonus rooms, I'm happy that there's still a reward for getting all the collectibles once more. The Lost World is back, and like last time, you unlock new optional levels by paying 15 bonus coins for each one, except for the last one which costs 25 bonus coins. I'd say that DKC2 is the hardest of the SNES trilogy, but DKC3 undoubtedly has the harder Lost World levels. Stampede, Sprint, and Rocket Rush are the ones I have the most beef with. The first one is basically a mock speed section from Sonic 06 starring Ellie the Terrified Elephant. My eyes always hurt by the end of it because of how fast you move. And it's absolute hell when trying to complete it because you have to keep Harry alive the entire time to access the level's sole bonus room. It's trial and error, just like Rocket Rush. The first part isn't so bad since you can somewhat control how fast the rocket descends. I say somewhat because it doesn't always listen to my inputs. But the second half is unbeatable unless you know what's ahead. If you crash into the cliffs, you don't die, you just slow down. But if this happens more than once, you are not getting to the top. These two combined with Animal Antics form the unholy triforce of Donkey Kong Country. I'll save the rest of the optional content for the end of the video. For now, let's go over the animal buddies. On Guard, Squawks, Squitter, and Quawks return, and their roles have been shrunk for the most part. While they have the same abilities they had in DKC2, there aren't as many stages that star them. The lack of Squitter hurts me the most, since as you all know, he's my favorite one. And what do you know, one of the few levels he's in happens to be one of the best in the game. The persistent reticle tailing your ass makes it so tense, I love it. Quawks is the odd one out here because he actually shows up in a couple of stages this time. The main gimmick with him is that he has to carry barrels and drop them on enemies to kill them and clear a path forward. There's actually quite a few clever puzzles that require this barrel dropping mechanic. I know he was in DKC2, but DKC3 feels like Quawks' real debut. And although the others don't get as much love anymore, one of the new animal buddies does, and she's one of the best in the series, Ellie the Elephant. The designers clearly had a lot of ideas for her. She's the animal buddy you'll be using the most. Ellie may not have Rambi's ferocity, but she can use her trunk to pick up barrels and use them as a makeshift attack, or in select stages where there's water nearby, she can store the water and shoot long-range lethal droplets to kill enemies. She's unable to swim underwater, so there's a couple of times where you'll have to fall into the water from a high altitude and let gravity do its work for the bonus barrel. Now, is it just me or does it seem like Rare loved Ellie a little too much? To me, she has the exact opposite problem of some of the other animal buddies. She is overused. Murky Mill, an Ellie exclusive level, shows up as early as the first world, and it's one of many. Oh yeah, and her fear of mice is why she's running faster than the freaking Roadrunner in that Stampede Sprint level I talked about. The only other new animal buddy is Perry the Parallel Bird. You can't play as him, instead he flies parallel above you and mimics your every move. Sometimes he will turn into a bonus barrel if you reach a no animal sign with him, so it's your job to keep him alive until you get there. Do I have to bring up Stampede Sprint again? Animal buddies as a concept were more fleshed out in DKC2. DKC3 gives us the most versatile one yet, but it came at the cost of shoving the others to the sidelines. Nonetheless, they're better here than they were in DKC1. And let's savor them while we can, because animal buddies will never be the same again. On the other hand, I think DKC3 has the best boss fights thus far. There's still room for improvement, none of these guys are particularly difficult, but the means by which you fight them are super creative. Not counting Chaos, you can't even jump on these guys to hurt them. There's this sentient barrel you have to push over the edge by throwing bugs into its mouth, a giant spider that has to be hit in the face with barrels, a slug you fight as Ellie by blinding it with her spit, Frosty the snowman who challenges you to a snowball fight, a big lurchin you fight as On Guard, and Baron K. Rulenstein, which isn't as challenging as the previous K. Rool encounters, but again, the way you fight him makes up for it, throwing barrels at his backpack and dodging electricity and fireballs. Pretty lame that he doesn't have a unique boss theme anymore though. The final battle in the Lost World also ends in a very anticlimactic fashion. The screen just abruptly fades to black. I know this isn't the true ending of the game, but they could have done something better than what we got. Getting the true ending is no longer a matter of completing every bonus room, finding every DK coin, and conquering the Lost World. DKC3 has a much meatier post-game thanks to the addition of another collectible and a whole-ass trade quest involving the Brothers Bear. Not the Brother Bears, the Brothers Bear. So here's how it goes. Your ultimate goal is to rescue the 15 banana birds in exchange for the banana bird queen's help to stop K. Rool. I'm not calling him this anymore. Most of the banana birds are hidden around the world, and I'm not referring to the levels. DKC3 has a world map that you can move around in freely using Funky's rental services where you can borrow his vehicles to access new areas. This is one of the best things about this game. I've always liked when platformers add secrets on the actual overworld map. Super Mario 3D World does something like this, and it takes exploration to a whole new level. As you progress through the game and get better vehicles by beating bosses, more hidden banana bird locations open up to you. They're hidden in caves where you have to play a game of Simon Says. I'm embarrassed to disclose the number of times I failed his minigame, so let's just skip this part. Funky's gyrocopter is what you really want, as it lets you reach banana bird caves that are normally inaccessible. You unlock the gyrocopter by getting all 41 DK coins, which in turn means you have to get every bonus coin to unlock the Lost World levels containing the rest of the DK coins. This is another nitpick I have with DKC3 actually. The DK coins are now all held by enemies called coins, spelled with a K. It's not super different from last time, looking for the coin is still the objective, but now you have to use steel barrels and ricochet them off walls or perform some other roundabout trickery with them to kill the coin and steal their DK coin. Confused yet? Some of these are satisfying to solve, others are annoying. It's a mixed bag. At the end of the day, DKC2 handled this better. Plus, their hurt boxes are absolutely busted. Come on, you're gonna tell me that didn't count? With the gyrocopter, you can find every banana bird except 4 of them. This is where the Brothers Bear come into play, the only other supporting NPCs aside from Wrinkly, Funky, and Swanky Kong. The good thing is that Wrinkly no longer charges you for wanting to save your game, but Swanky has decided to pivot his operation into a carnival with 3 mini-games for you to participate in. These are ass. The Brothers Bear are scattered across the northern hemisphere. You can trade key items with them in return for other key items that another one of the bears might need. Keep doing this and eventually you'll get the remaining banana birds. The funniest one is Brash, since he has a temper tantrum after you beat his record in one of the earlier levels. A temper tantrum so earth-shaking that it affects the world map and opens the way to a banana bird cave. As I stated, once you find all the banana birds, the banana bird queen will take care of K. Rool in a silly, albeit amusing sequence. This game is weird. Also, I finished the game with 103% completion, even though I swore that the max you could get is 105%. Turns out you can only get 105 if you play on toughest mode by entering a code before starting a new game. All it does is remove checkpoint barrels and a good chunk of the DK barrels from what I was able to find. Even though this is the official ending, there's something that still feels incomplete about it. I have this suspicion that DKC3 was rushed. There isn't any build up to the Banana Bird side quest, and the inconsistent theming of the levels as well as the presence of jank in areas that had been ironed out in DKC2 are off-putting. And it might be my imagination, but the controls don't feel as responsive as they used to. I'm probably going crazy, but I swear it took me a couple of levels before I adjusted to the handling. It's possible that Rare wanted to get this game out as quickly as they could so that they could shift all their focus on the N64. Even Wrinkly can be seen playing the console from time to time. She doesn't want anything to do with this late Super Nintendo game either. If Rare took more time to polish the minor blemishes, explore the Banana Bird questline more in depth, and flesh out the nature versus technology concept the designers were clearly interested in tackling, this game could have been as great as Diddy's Conquest. But as it stands, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble isn't as refined as its prequel. However, I'm glad to say that I enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. I'm glad I didn't do a 180 and go back on my first impressions from my playthrough 7 years ago. It's still a favorable platformer that I will try to revisit more often. And with that, we have looked at all the Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo, meaning that the next time we meet will be on the Nintendo Wii with Retro Studios' first attempt at a DKC sequel, Donkey Kong Country Returns. Last time we finished looking at Donkey Kong Country 3, and after its release in 1996, the series went on a 14-year-long hiatus. That doesn't sound right. Let's delve a little deeper. The DKC franchise had made its mark in gaming. Every game up to this point was great in their own ways. The series became so popular that it even got a TV show. This is God's greatest creation. Let's shift our attention over to an era that Nintendo fans remember fondly. The time when Nintendo got their asses kicked by Sony. The first time of many. The Nintendo 64 was filled with its highs and lows, and a lot of the highs were thanks to Rare's restless efforts. Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, GoldenEye 007, Perfect Dark, Killer Instinct, Jet Force Gemini, Conker's Bad Fur Day. What? All Rareware projects. They were working overtime. And since pretty much every IP was making the jump to 3D around this time, you bet that Rare capitalized on the 3D craze by bringing Donkey Kong Country to this new dimension. Except, not exactly. Donkey Kong 64, like Super Mario 64 before it, was just built different. This was a collectathon set in the Donkey Kong Country universe and now lives in infamy as that one game nobody likes fully completing. That's a story for another time. Rare continued to prove themselves as a vital asset to Nintendo, and I'm sure they continued producing quality games for Nintendo's future systems. That didn't last long. Often seen as one of the most baffling acquisitions in the industry now that we know what it led to, Microsoft bought out Rare in 2002, which meant that Rare had to cancel several projects that they had been cooking up for the GameCube. And most relevant to this video, this meant that Donkey Kong Country was left without a developer. Now, you may think that Nintendo themselves could take over if they ever wanted to make another entry, but the weird thing I've noticed about Nintendo is that once they hand over one of their franchises to another developer, they suddenly contract a case of poo-poo brain and are lost when they have to do something within that series again. I'm jumping forward about a decade for the sake of giving an example, but for Mario Kart 7, Nintendo reached out to Retro Studios to create the assets for Jungle Hijinks from Returns. I mean, who better to help out with that track than the guys behind the game it's based on, I guess? Still, it's a little silly. Over the next couple of years, Donkey Kong would go on to star in a few other games like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat and the Donkey Kong line of games that have the greatest control method known to mankind. He co-starred in the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games and of course still had a presence in spin-offs like Mario Party. As for the Country series though, after the GBA ports were finished, it was put on pause. Enter the Nintendo Wii, one of Nintendo's most successful consoles because of its ability to attract filthy casuals who still think the Game Boy is relevant. The Wii era is also when Nintendo started allocating more resources into developing 2D games after the rising interest in retro titles. You know, simpler times. Simpler. Now enter Retro Studios. Of course, these guys are famous for creating the Metroid Prime series, turning Metroid from a 2D game into a 3D first-person adventure. One day Nintendo took a good look at Metroid Prime and thought, yes, make a Donkey Kong game. Okay, it's not as random as how I presented it. The president and CEO of Retro happens to be a former Nintendo of America employee who worked on the first 3 DKC games. For this new installment, Retro wanted to go back to basics to make this a true successor to the Rareware titles, and thus the fittingly titled Donkey Kong Country Returns was made and released on November 21st, 2010 in North America. Any doubts folks may have had over Retro Studios spearheading the project disappeared upon the game's release. Needless to say, Retro outdid themselves. This is an excellent first attempt at a Donkey Kong Country game and is a more than worthy follow-up to the 3 games that preceded it. Let's see here, I got the game in early 2011, so I still wasn't all that privy to gaming news. So the way that I found out about Donkey Kong Country Returns was at Costco. The game section was the only thing that kept me entertained when my family went grocery shopping there, and one day, I just happened to see it. I begged my parents to buy it for me, they did, and that was one of the most painful car rides back home that I have ever experienced. And when I finally got to play Returns, a wave of nostalgia completely overtook me. I loved every second of that first playthrough. It was like the Donkey Kong Country I grew up with, only it looked way better, the levels were so fun and interesting, and ow my arms. So, the Wii version of Donkey Kong Country Returns is the version I played for this review, but 5 years after it came out, it got ported to the Nintendo 3DS. On the Wii, the game runs at 60 frames per second and certain actions require motion controls. The 3DS version maps every command to buttons, which automatically makes this the best version to play, right? Well, yes And no, I vastly prefer the control scheme here, don't get me wrong, but the frame rate is now cut in half. I don't even really mind the lower resolution, but 30 FPS for a fast-paced platformer isn't unplayable, but I'm not a big fan of it. That's not all though, this version has a new mode called New Mode that gives each Kong an extra hit point and adds a couple of new items to the in-game shop. And most notably, the post-game has 7 brand new stages. Now, I would have put my feelings about the 30 FPS cap aside so that I could show off these levels in more detail, if it weren't for the sad fact that I can't get footage of this version. I don't have a 3DS capture card, and while I use the 3DS emulator Citra to get footage of Samus Returns when I reviewed that game, you may also remember from that video that I have a Mac, and Macs don't have the best gaming support. As such, a lot of games I've tried on Citra are very laggy and or buggy, Returns 3D included. So what I'll say is this: if you can tolerate a slightly worse looking and performing port of this game, then the 3DS version has better controls and is a bit more rich in content. Any one of these though is worth your time and money. You know the drill at this point, let's look at the story first. You're going to notice a recurring theme throughout this video, and that's me making comparisons between this game and the first Donkey Kong Country game. Returns is most inspired by that game in particular, and that inspiration can be seen as early as the opening cutscene cause, oh no, the Banana Horde has been taken again. However, the Kremlings have nothing to do with it. Returns introduces a new faction of villains known as the Tiki Tak Tribe, comprised of these sentient tiki masks that can mind control the inhabitants of DK Island, all except Donkey and Diddy Kong. I'm assuming they watch such an unhealthy amount of the Donkey Kong Country TV show, by that I mean 2 minutes, that their heads are so empty that they are unaffected by the Tiki spell, and Donkey responds in the only way he knows how: violence. After making their way through the island and defeating each one of the Tiki commanders, the Kongs reach the top of the volcano, witness a would-be gory ritualistic sacrifice if this game was rated M, and put an end to Tiki Tong's shenanigans by crushing his tower with the f***ing moon. Glad to see that DKC silliness is still intact. The Tikis suck. Nobody likes them. They have a pretty catchy theme song, but they're not very memorable. Other than that, it's Grand Theft Banana again, what do you want me to say? I like the pre-rendered FMVs at the beginning and end of the game. They're animated really well, and the ending ones in particular give a nice sense of finality. This clip always pumps me up. It's the same story as DKC1, but with a less interesting group of villains. Sad to say that the Kremlings aren't in Tropical Freeze either, and I've always found their absence in these games to be odd. Is there a licensing issue? Does Nintendo not own the full rights to the Kremlings? If Retro ever makes a third DKC game, I really hope that they come back. Donkey Kong Country Returns. What a perfect name. Not just because this is a return to the franchise, but because this game can be summed up by simply reading the title out loud. Donkey Kong Country Returns. Retro Studios essentially reimagined the first Donkey Kong Country right down to its gameplay, setting, music, and even its drawbacks. Not one-to-one mind you, and I in no way am insinuating that this is a bad thing. I adore DKC1, and I don't think there's anything wrong with a series revival borrowing ideas from the game that most people remember, and Retro would later come out of their comfort zone with a follow-up to Returns. Like I said, Returns is like a reimagining. Retro put their own spin on the formula that makes their take on Donkey Kong Country different and, in some ways, more engaging. We're back to just having 2 Kongs, Donkey and Diddy. Yes, for the first time since the original, we get to play as the character whose name is on the freaking box. The basics are all here and accounted for. Donkey Kong can still jump on or roll into enemies. The mid-air jump after a roll remains intact and actually gives you way more horizontal distance than before. Barrels and other items can still be picked up and tossed, though I don't know what it is, but I've never gotten used to the new arc at which DK tosses things. He's still got the which is now used to interact with various parts of the level in order to progress, in conjunction with being used to uncover hidden collectibles. New to Donkey Kong's moveset is the blow, and it pretty much serves the same function as the Donkey can now also do what gamers dread: touch grass. Certain walls and ceilings are now climbable, and just as a quick tip, if it looks like it leads somewhere out of the camera's view, it probably does. Now, here's where things really start to differ from the SNES trilogy. Diddy Kong is back as your companion, but unless you're playing with a buddy in co-op mode that I wasn't able to show off because who the hell am I going to play this game with, you can no longer choose who's in the lead. Now when you free Diddy from a DK barrel, he hops on Donkey's back and provides a couple of benefits, including a continuous roll and, best of all, his jetpack that allows you to stay in the air for a short period of time by holding the jump button. It's nothing compared to Dixie's floating ability, but nevertheless, it's an invaluable move to have in some of the game's tougher platforming challenges. Diddy also adds an additional 2 hearts to your health. By default, Donkey can only get hit twice before losing a life, meaning you can now have a maximum of 4 hearts with their powers combined. Am I bummed that you can't play as Diddy on his own in the single player? Well, not really actually, because Donkey Kong, even by himself, is perfectly capable of taking on any and all obstacles along the journey. Using him no longer feels like a handicap, and you still get Diddy's perks if you can keep him alive, except for his peanut pop gun that's exclusive to co-op. Functionally, it's not all that different to how it was handled previously, except you can no longer throw your partner like in DKC 2 and 3. And thanks to the camera being much more zoomed out, which gets rid of the screen crunch that I have complained about in the last 3 videos, on top of the excellent, precise movement and feel of the gameplay, this is by far one of the best controlling 2D platformers of all time and the best controlling DKC game yet. If you're playing the 3DS version, Donkey Kong Country Returns is a Nintendo Wii game. Need I say more? Now, I'm not some motion control hater. In certain cases, I firmly believe motion controls can elevate gameplay in a way that traditional controls can't. If you watched my Skyward Sword review, you know I preferred the motion controls on the Switch version. Metroid Prime Trilogy is my favorite way to revisit the first 2 Prime games, and I still instinctively shake the Joy-Con when playing Galaxy via the 3D All-Stars collection. Guess who's a hypocrite? But note that I said that motion controls can elevate the gameplay, because in other cases they do the exact opposite. They become intrusive and frustrating to deal with, such as in a fast-paced platformer. The roll, the blow, the banana are all activated by shaking the Wiimote, which means you're gonna shake this thing again and again and again. It's even worse with the Wiimote and nunchuck. I've been playing Returns with the Wiimote on its side since my first playthrough because I only have to shake one thing. If you plug in the nunchuck, it's nice that you no longer have to hold a button to run, but now you have to shake both peripherals if you want to do the continuous roll or blow or... As I stated, if you have the 3DS version, you don't have to deal with this nonsense. It's one of my least favorite things about Returns as a whole, but I also wouldn't say that it's a deal breaker by any stretch. Retro Studios modernized and refined nearly everything else I loved about the Rare games. I'd say their crowning achievement with both Returns and Tropical Freeze is the level design, one of, if not the most important thing to get right in a platformer. I tried, guys. I really tried finding a lackluster level in this game, any level that I could confidently say has some kind of glaring design flaw or stupid gimmick, but I couldn't. DKC Returns manages to give us bigger stages that are so dense and filled with exhilarating set pieces at almost every waking second. So many of these stages are like amusement park rides, uninterrupted bursts of adrenaline-filled platforming perfection. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, almost every level gives you something different to do, something different to appreciate and be mesmerized by. A lot of times you'll be switching between the background and foreground, almost as if this game was originally designed for the 3DS and not the Wii. It's cool in this game, not so cool in Smash Brothers. That one sucks. There's so many amazing levels and I'd love to talk about all of them, but I'd be here all day if I did that. The silhouette levels are breathtaking and I wish this game had more of them. There's a whole world dedicated to the vehicles you can ride, from the returning minecart from DKC 1 and the rocket barrel from DKC 3. These levels perfectly encapsulate the amusement park ride analogy I used earlier. As a kid, I used to replay these all the time. It's a bit of a hassle when going after the Kong letters, but ignoring that, they're just plain fun. And the rocket barrel is nothing like that frustrating piece of junk from Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Now it's used in left to right auto-scrollers like the minecart, and you have to control its altitude by holding the jump button to ascend and letting go to descend, though on 2 occasions it harkens back to its roots a bit. And don't even get me started on World 7, which houses my personal favorite platforming stages, mainly because I adore the factory setting with all the moving machinery. I especially love the levels where you have to find the red switches to power the rocket you'll use at the end of the world to reach the boss. It's a seamless way of tying your actions in the levels to actual story progression. I wouldn't call these levels bad, but World 2 is probably my least favorite. Beach settings have never really been my thing in platformers. However, Stormy Shore sticks out thanks to Squidicus, this giant octopus octopus that terrorizes you throughout the entire level. Speaking of settings, you may have noticed from the footage that the level themes in Returns are a lot more tame. This links back to what I mentioned about Returns taking a lot of cues from the first Donkey Kong Country game. You're on DK Island again, even though the Donkey Kong shaped mountainside is sadly missing. The world order follows a very safe template. The first world is jungle themed, second world is beach themed, third world is temple themed, fourth world is mine themed, fifth world is forest themed, sixth world is cliff themed, seventh world is factory themed, eighth world is volcano themed, and the ninth world is LSD themed. Not only do we not really see any level themes that we haven't already seen, but this may sound weird considering how much I gushed about how great the stages are here, but the sheer quantity of stages can make certain worlds feel a little long for their own good. After the 9th cliff level, visual boredom can start to set in after staring at the same assets for the last hour or two of gameplay. Personally, this has never really bugged me. It's something I only really noticed during my latest playthrough. I'm merely pointing it out as a potential criticism some may have about this game. Again, the good thing is that these stages are a blast to play through. And for those who may be worried that Retro chickened out on the difficulty since this released on a console that could pass off as a Mattel product, put those worries aside because Returns honors the original trilogy's reputation for being hard. Nothing worthy of breaking your controller over, most of the time, but it's no walk in the park either. There's a much greater variety of enemies no matter how forgettable a lot of them may be, and lots of them require different strategies to avoid them. And it bears repeating, these levels are nuts. Your reflexes have to be on point, and be careful about bum rushing into the unknown cause more than likely it will result in death. Thankfully, Cranky Kong is here to alleviate some of your stress by selling helpful items you can bring into levels that range from invincibility potions to an extra hit point. He also sells keys that unlock different paths on the world map, opening the way to optional stages. You pay him in banana coins, but trust me, they're so abundant that you don't need to be concerned about running low, especially if you always go after that DK bonus at the end of each level to get a multiplier of up to 15 of a certain item. No need to pay for saving or anything like that either. In fact, the game auto-saves after every level. But the trade-off is you now have to suffer through some pretty long loading screens. Technology, everybody, it stinks. Well, that's not completely true because better technology means we have more graphical power to work with. Now, I'm actually one of those people that prefers when 2D games go for a pixelated art style, or better yet, a hand-drawn art style. The only thing I don't like about 2.5D is the very real possibility that it will one day look dated. Donkey Kong Country Returns is one of the best looking games on the Wii and maintains a silky smooth 60 FPS throughout, but yeah, you can definitely see its age now. The Wii was underpowered even when it released, so the character models don't have a lot of polygons, resulting in some subtle, albeit noticeable blockiness, and the game isn't in HD, so there's a lot of jaggies. Don't even get me started on the 3DS version in that department. For the hardware it's on, it looks great, but in my opinion, the Rareware games did a better job at remaining timeless despite the unorthodox nature of the visuals. They looked great then, and they still look great now. But how about that music? You all know by now that I am very fond of the original soundtracks. By the way, quick side note, if you want to experience these amazing songs at a whole other level of quality, check out these soundtrack restorations composed by Jam and Sam Miller on YouTube. They are nothing short of magnificent and deserve all the attention they can get. Listening to the Mining Melancholy restoration put me in a state of speechlessness that delayed this review by a full week since I couldn't record the script. Anyways, the soundtrack in Returns is extremely good. Most of it is made up of modern remixes of classic songs from DKC1 like Jungle Hijinks, Voices of the Temple, Treetop Rock, Fear Factory, the list goes on and on. But the new compositions made specifically for this game deserve attention as well. There's some great shit in here. Sticking with the tone of the first game, a lot of the new songs try to be ambient and atmospheric. But when the situation calls for something more intense, the music delivers. The last world is filled with these foreboding, serious tunes, and then there's the best new song here, the Rocket Barrel theme. Getting a big band to play in these levels, count me the hell in. The soundtrack is also very dynamic. The overworld theme changes slightly depending on the area of the island you're in. Songs like Minecart Madness transform to match the level setting. It's very impressive and goes to show that a lot of care was put into the OST. And when you beat the game, oh my god, could it be the return of Credit Concerto? Alright, other than that, heartbreaking tease, Kenji Yamamoto did some damn fine work and is a worthy replacement for David Wise as this game's main composer. Every boss even has their own unique theme, and now that I've intentionally brought them up to make a smooth transition into my next point, the bosses in Returns are freaking incredible. Alright, they're not all winners. The mole fight isn't terribly exciting and doesn't last very long when you figure out you can roll jump to the front of the train to skip this phase completely. And they just couldn't resist reusing World 1's boss for World 6, only now he's purple and has a couple more tricks up his sleeve. But almost every other boss annihilates the bosses from the original trilogy in terms of creativity, strategy, and challenge. The easiest and most disappointing boss to me is the final one, him and his Bongo Bongo from Ocarina of Time as weakness. I wonder what I have to do. Colonel Pluck has gotta be my favorite. He's the boss that always gives me the most shit, but it's a good challenge. I like the gimmick of having to sneak between his legs and on second thought, this is pretty suggestive, so I won't say anything else. I'm just happy to finally be able to say with confidence that the bosses in a Donkey Kong Country game aren't cakewalks. They are exciting, have interesting designs that make up for the boring designs of their Tiki masters, and fighting them is so impactful thanks to the audience in the arena. Okay, I'm overdue for complaints, so let's just get this over with. Animal buddies, how I took thee for granted. Donkey Kong Country Returns only has 2 animal buddies. Squawks can only be bought in the shop and lets you know when there's a puzzle piece nearby in the level. Oh, we'll get to these in a bit. That leaves Rambi as the only animal buddy you can ride. He can kill enemies with his horn and has a continuous dash, but riding him nerfs your jump height and Diddy's jetpack. Those aren't compromises I'm personally willing to make. So not only is there just one rideable animal buddy, he also sucks. The animal buddies in the other games, when done right, had interesting abilities that allowed for more varied level design and special scenarios that weren't possible with the ordinary movesets of the Kongs. The level design in Returns is already top notch, but Rambi doesn't really enhance any of the stages he's in. Rambi's main purpose is to discover bonus rooms. And oh, bonus rooms, what do they do to you?
Look how they mess with my boy.
Bonus rooms in DKC 2 and 3, heck even a good chunk of the ones in DKC 1, were unique. Time and real effort was used to craft these intricate, bite-sized minigames that didn't feel compromised compared to the rest of the game, and rewarded you with something useful when you completed them. In Returns, they all look the fucking same. The same objective of collecting all the bananas before time runs out for every single one. And the layouts get reused over and over again because there's a pool of like only 7 different ones for them to choose from. And when you complete them, you no longer get collectibles that are needed to unlock more content, or an expanded moveset, or a new animal buddy, or the location of Jimmy Hoffa, nothing like that. You get a puzzle piece. Puzzle pieces are hidden in levels and earned from completing bonus rooms, and getting all the puzzle pieces in a level nets you a new entry in one of the galleries in the main menu. Now look, there's nothing wrong with rewards that don't factor into your completion percentage. It's neat that there's a way to unlock other types of bonuses that longtime fans would appreciate. But if you want to fill out the galleries, you have to play every single monotonous bonus room, and there's so many. They're not fun, they're tedious, they only interrupt the flow of the excellent gameplay loop. It's not worth it. You know what? I'm happy that these aren't required for 100% anymore, cause I wouldn't be able to do it. Fortunately, unlockable levels and a post-game do return, but this has some downsides as well. There is now one secret difficult level in each world that is made available after finding every Kong letter in every single stage in that world. Previously, collecting all the Kong letters in a level gave you an extra life. Now they are the main collectible, but instead of being inside fun bonus rooms, which in turn made the process of obtaining the tokens in DKC 2 and 3 fun, the letters are just there. Unless you enjoy torture, there's not a lot of incentive to explore these expansive levels anymore. This is probably why these levels in World 7 are so appealing to me. They give me an excuse to investigate my surroundings without the fear of landing in some The good thing is that getting all the Kong letters is well worth it in my opinion, because the levels they open contain ass-clench worthy platforming segments that I love trying to conquer. Reaching the end of each of these mysterious temples gives you a crystal orb. Nabbing all 8 unlocks World 9 after you beat the game. Donkey and Diddy are transported to a hallucinogenic banana dream world after eating from the Golden Banana. No! As I brought up, the 3DS version adds 7 new levels to World 9 while the Wii version only has the 1, which I can't really get mad about considering that I already played 8 unlockable levels to get here. After doing all of this, mirror mode becomes available in every level. The stage is now flipped horizontally, you can only use Donkey Kong and you only have 1 heart. Great for those who want more replay value, but the main adventure was sufficient for me. And I'm honestly not good enough to beat every level in mirror mode, though your percentage does go up with every stage you beat, and each mirrored stage has its own set of Kong letters and its own set of terrible bonus rooms. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll stop. Donkey Kong Country Returns is no doubt a stellar video game. The level variety and design, gameplay, controls, music, difficulty, and bosses match or exceed what came before. But sadly, Retro Studios missed the mark on some key ingredients that to me make Donkey Kong Country so special, with the biggest offense being the wretched integration of bonus rooms into the experience. You may think that I'm exaggerating my thoughts about the bonus rooms and returns, but I'm really not. They were butchered so hard in my eyes that I can't ignore it. If it doesn't bother you, that's great, I envy you. But like with my complaints about the 100% cleanups in Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, Samus Returns, and Dread, which I received a little bit of resentment over in a few comments in those videos, I have to, and most importantly want to, talk about this stuff that I'm passionate about because, guys, these are personal retrospectives. If everyone shared the same opinions about everything, this entire subgenre of YouTube content would be super boring and there'd be no reason to watch other people's reviews. Returns has a couple of things that really annoy me, but that doesn't take away from it being an outstanding 2D platformer still filled with that iconic DKC charm. Too bad this came out when they changed Donkey Kong's voice. Come on, where's the... This game deserves a remaster on the Switch with updated visuals and the controls and extras from the 3DS version. It would fit right in on the console that also happens to have Retro Studios' second and to this day latest project starring the Prime Primate, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Our last stop on this Donkey Kong Country retrospective. Be careful what you wish for, I guess, because Returns HD just came out and sure, it has the 3DS content, which is a nice bonus, but it looks like ass. I'm sorry. I legitimately think the Wii version still looks better. And $60 Nintendo? What the fuck? And just like that, we've made it. The last Donkey Kong Country game. Throughout this retrospective, we've seen how this series has evolved since its humble beginnings in the 90s, and I've explained how much I love each and every installment. I have some minor issues with a couple of them, but overall, the DKC franchise is 2D platforming at its finest. And in recent memory, no other game encompasses this more than the game we're looking at today. So what do you say? Let's end the Donkey Kong Country retrospective with a bang. This is Metroid Prime 4. Wait, what? You mean Returns wasn't a one and done? Alright then. Rumors about Retro Studios' newest project were circulating around the internet in 2013, and after the release of the Antichrist, many Nintendo fans were hoping that the game they were working on was a fourth Metroid Prime game. E3 came around, and when Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was revealed, what do you think happened? Retro CEO Michael Kelbach shared that the Returns team still had a lot of ideas for Donkey Kong Country that they wanted to bring to life, which is why they opted for making a sequel only a couple of years later. Now, you guys know me, I'm a big Metroid fan, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I was extremely butthurt. So much so that even though Returns was one of my favorite games ever at the time, I barely even paid attention to the Tropical Freeze trailer. I couldn't care less. But then, I stopped being a jackass. I rewatched the reveal and holy shit, this game looks so beautiful. Look at the level of detail in DK's model, underwater levels are back. Look at the crazy camera angles and oh my god, it's Trixie! Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze was slated for a November release, but this was the Wii U era, delaying games during this time was Nintendo's specialty, and Tropical Freeze wasn't immune to this as it got pushed back to December 6th. Then in their October Direct, they announced that it wasn't coming out until February 2014. Okay. Tropical Freeze was already having a hard time attracting attention as it was. It wasn't a game that many people asked for, and do I even need to finish the sentence? Plus, although I and a couple of others were excited, unless you were a die-hard DKC fan, I wouldn't blame you for not being all that interested based on that initial reveal. It looked like a prettier version of Returns, and that's about it. Future trailers did a better job at showcasing how different the final product ended up being, and revealed that not only was Dixie returning, but for the very first time, Cranky was going to be playable as well. This was leaked thanks to an official Amazon listing showing the official box art with Cranky on the cover. This game really didn't stand a chance, did it? So yeah, the 2 delays were the final nail in the coffin for Tropical Freeze. I don't remember there being much fanfare when it finally came out on February 21st, 2014, and by 2020 the game had barely sold 2 million units. Compare this to Returns, which sold nearly 5 million copies within its first 6 months on the market. I think even critics let the lack of hype get to them, as the game has a lower Metacritic score than its predecessor, which is insane because Tropical Freeze is an improvement in nearly every way, is what I think now. I got the game on launch day and beat it that very weekend, and I didn't think much of it. I mean, I knew it was a really good game, of course it was, but I didn't think it was anything special. I had about as much fun with it as I did with Returns, and for the next few years, that's how I saw the game. Another Returns. But then something strange happened. Nintendo stopped f***ing up. The Nintendo Switch has played a huge role in helping Nintendo recuperate losses from the Wii U era. Ports of Wii U games do extremely well on the console because, well, people actually have this thing. Feel unloved? Just release on the Switch, you'll get everyone's attention. On January 11th, 2018, Nintendo held a Nintendo Direct Mini where they announced that Tropical Freeze would be getting a Switch version for $60. Okay, Nintendo. When Tropical Freeze came out on the Wii U, it retailed for $50. In 2018, the game was 4 years old and Nintendo thought it'd be a great idea to bump the asking price by $10 without adding much content to justify it.
Speaking of, you can play as his grooviness in the all-new funky mode.
Oh damn, never mind then. Plus, the Wii U version was eventually added to the Nintendo Selects line, so really, we're talking about a $40 difference here. Well, that fixes everything. I can accept Nintendo being stubborn about not offering discounts for their new games. I don't agree with it, but I can accept it. I need help. But I can't accept their practice of porting old games to the Switch with minor touch-ups and changes for the same price from when they first came out, or more in some cases. I mean it, I need help. Okay, I didn't actually get the Switch version when it came out. I actually got it not that long ago when it was on sale because I knew I wanted to review it for the channel. So when it came out on the Switch, I booted up the rotting corpse I had stored in my closet and replayed Tropical Freeze there. And thus, my third eye was opened. I became enlightened. When I finished that playthrough, I finally got it. When we're just talking about the pure act of platforming, I have yet to play another platformer as well crafted as Tropical Freeze. So let's get into it already. Unlike the 2 versions of Returns, there's no question that Tropical Freeze on the Switch is the definitive way to play the game. And that's not even taking into account the inclusion of our Lord and Savior. On the Switch, the game's resolution is bumped up to 1080p from 720p when the console is docked. Load times are significantly faster, which is a huge plus because the load times on the Wii U were excruciatingly long, worse than in Returns even. Donkey's idle animation has been changed so that he now pulls out a Switch instead of a 3DS XL. And alright, I'll stop beating around the bush. Tropical Freeze on Switch introduces the brand new Funky mode that changes a whole lot of things, so hopefully I don't forget any of them here. The big thing is obviously the ability to play as Funky Kong. He has the continuous roll by default and can spam the underwater attack as well. He can double jump and use his surfboard to float in the air, pretty much serving as the closest thing we've gotten to Dixie's hair twirl from DKC2 since that game. That surfboard can also be used to negate all damage from spikes and skip across water like Kiddy Kong. And to top it off, he has a whopping 5 hearts, though he's by himself no matter what, he can't team up with a buddy. Funky mode is not just a mode where you can play as Funky Kong, it's also essentially this game's version of New Mode from Returns. You can switch to Donkey Kong at any time outside of a level, and just like in New Mode, he starts off with 3 hearts and you can add another 3 to your total health when you have a buddy with you. The in-game shop is back, and in Funky mode it's run by Tox, Funky's hip and cool parrot friend. The items in this mode are a lot more effective, by the way. Now, here's what kinda sucks. The only way to play as Funky Kong is in Funky mode, but you can't choose to keep the original mode's difficulty. So you're stuck with, let's be real here, an absurd amount of hearts no matter what you do, and there's no way to switch between Funky and original mode once you started a new game. You're stuck with what you pick. Just because of that, I did my entire playthrough in original mode because I wanted the most challenge possible. But hey, if you think the base game is too hard, Funky mode should be just right for you. The game opens up with Donkey, Diddy, Dixie, and Cranky celebrating the gorilla's 20th birthday. They don't say it's his 20th or even that it's his birthday, but 2014 was the 20-year anniversary of the DKC series, so I'm just gonna go with 20. Mark your calendars, everyone. They're having a good time until their fun is interrupted by the Snowmads, who proceed to conquer DK Island by sending a freaking ice dragon that blows the Kong several islands away. Oh, and it causes an eternal winter too. Whoops. By eternal, I mean for as long as it takes you to return to DK Island as the Kongs go on a journey to make their way back, and in the end, put an end to the Snowmad schemes. Right off the bat, I appreciate that this isn't a rehash premise like we saw in Returns, and the Snowmads are leagues better than the Tikis as villains. Just from the opening cutscene, these Arctic animals show actual personality. They don't really have any motives for why they want to take over DK Island other than we're Vikings and that's what we do, but I like them. Still miss the Kremlings, not gonna lie, but at the same time, I've gotta give it to Retro for not backing down from the challenge of creating new villains for these games. Even Nintendo can't be bothered to at the very least bring back characters like Wart or Tatonga in modern Mario games. From that plot synopsis, the game structure should be pretty self-explanatory. There are 6 different islands you have to travel through to beat the game. Tropical Freeze reverts back to the number of worlds there were in the SNES games. This does mean that the game is a bit shorter than Returns, but quantity doesn't always equal quality, and this game is a prime example of that saying. Before I get to the good stuff, let's talk about the gameplay and the improvements that have been made to it. Right off the bat, whether you're playing this on the Wii U or the Switch, you don't have to play with motion controls if you don't want to. Thank Christ. I must stress again that the motion controls in Returns weren't a deal breaker for me, but this is so much better. If you played Returns 3D, you know what you're getting into. The blow has now been replaced with the pluck. It's a very small change that goes a long way. It's as simple as holding one of the triggers when you find something in the level that can be pulled instead of having to shake the remote or press a button while crouching. Handling is essentially identical to how it was before, just as tight and responsive as I remember. One of the biggest new additions is underwater gameplay. Well, it's not really an addition, more like a comeback after being oddly absent in the last game. Unlike the original trilogy though, the swimming in Tropical Freeze feels like actual swimming. You can move freely while underwater and can speed up by pressing the jump button or do a corkscrew attack by pressing the action button. You have an air meter now and can refill it by touching these bubbles. If Sonic does it, why not Donkey Kong? Let's leave it at that though.
What is this?
The swimming feels so fluid. This is some of the best underwater control in any game I've ever played and actually makes water levels fun. But now let's go over one of this game's main selling points. Donkey is still the main Kong that you play as and he will always be in the lead like in Returns. But in conjunction with being able to get help from Diddy, now you can also get help from Dixie Kong or Cranky Kong. Warms my heart seeing an elderly person up and about. Each pair comes with their own set of moves. Diddy still has his trusty jetpack and can use it while swimming for a speed boost. Dixie Kong predictably doesn't have her broken float from Diddy's Conquest anymore. Instead, she can use her hair as what is essentially a better version of Diddy's jetpack since it can be used to slow your fall or get a bit of extra vertical distance. This can make all the difference in certain situations as you can imagine. And underwater, she can use her hair as a propeller of sorts to bypass strong currents. Cranky Kong is definitely the most unique of the trio. He pulls a Scrooge McDuck by using his cane as a pogo stick to bounce higher than a regular jump. This pogo bounce also ignores spike damage and is a more powerful attack than the standard stomp. While swimming, he can swing the stick around in front of him. Kind of redundant considering Donkey already has an attack underwater by default though. You might be thinking that Cranky is the most useless partner because he doesn't provide any kind of safety net in the air like Diddy and Dixie. And you're right, but if you're a speedrunner, you might find him to be the best partner. If you do the pogo bounce while carrying a lot of momentum, you can maintain a crazy amount of speed as long as you're able to keep the bounces going. It is no joke one of the most satisfying things you can do in this game, so let me follow that up with something that's utterly useless. Okay, the Kong Pao isn't completely useless. Basically, after collecting 100 bananas, this meter next to your health will fill up, indicating that a Kong Pao is available to use. These special moves are different depending on the partner you have when you activate it, but functionally they all act as screen nukes. With Diddy, all the enemies on screen turn into 1-up balloons. With Dixie, they turn into gold hearts that can stack on top of your current health even if it's full. And with Cranky, they turn into banana coins because you definitely need more of those, right? More than often, by that I mean all the time, I forget about the Kong Pao. I had to actively remind myself over and over again to show it off for this video because otherwise I would legitimately not remember. This game can be played in co-op like Returns, but once again I wasn't really able to show it off. It's exactly what you'd expect, though I'd like to point out that Dixie has a gumball pop gun to replace Diddy's peanut pop gun and Cranky shoots dentures. This is amazing. Also, this completely slipped my mind last time, but in Returns there was a Super Kong mode that became available after you died a certain number of times in a stage. You know, kinda like the Cosmic Rosalina from Galaxy 2 or Luigi from New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Those features that everyone despises even though they're optional and you don't have to use them if you don't want to because they're intended for people who don't play video games often. That being said, you deserve to be judged if you use these. Super Kong was removed in Tropical Freeze, Retro ain't showing you mercy this time. I'm gonna keep prolonging talking about this game's amazing levels so that I could talk about the presentation first. Simply put, Tropical Freeze is nothing but pure eye candy. The Wii U and Switch are much more powerful than the GameCube too, so not only do we have a higher resolution, but the amount of detail and work put into these character models and environments, I don't know how they did it, but it manages to look realistic while not losing those vibrant colors. Tropical Freeze's art design is some of the best I've ever seen. It's, in my opinion, the best looking 2.5D game ever made. You can see each strand of hair on the Kongs, the backgrounds are never empty and always have something interesting going on, and each obstacle you come across is an extension of the stage's environment. All the DKC games have been great at avoiding the lazy trope of having suspended platforms that have no rhyme or reason in their levels, but Tropical Freeze does it the best. And like, just look at these freaking levels, man. Look at the sunrise, look at the underwater silhouette stages, look at how everything pops, look at the burning savannah. I can watch it burn all day. And nothing's better than excellent graphics that are also accompanied by excellent music. David Wise is back as the main composer, and while Kenji Yamamoto did great in Returns, Wise was born to make Donkey Kong music. The new compositions are so varied. There's the jazzy tunes we've all come to know and love, but now there's songs like Grassland Groove that take heavy inspiration from African folk music. Sounds like it's straight out of The Lion King, it's great. The acoustic guitar in Seashore War sounds soothing as hell. Homecoming Hijinks, aka the Snowmats theme, just wow. You hear the full song in the first level of DK Island and it's simply epic. There's no other way to describe it. But of course, my inner DKC2 fanboy can't possibly resist bringing up the remixes. Returns brought back music from the first DKC game, and Tropical Freeze brings back music from the second one, and the entire world rejoiced. We've got remixes of Hothead Bop, Lockjaw Saga, In a Snowbound Land, even Sticker Brush Symphony. For like 20 seconds, but hey, it sounds better than the Brawl version. At least its short amount of time in the spotlight is made up for with aquatic ambience playing for an entire level instead of being relegated to one set piece. I still think I prefer DKC2 soundtrack overall, plus there's no remix of Mining Melancholy and that's simply unforgivable, but Tropical Freeze is probably a close second. The graphics and music are just the icing on the cake. Tropical Freeze really shines in its level design. Holy crap, the levels in Tropical Freeze, where do I even begin? No other platformer I've played matches the excitement, the sheer joy that I feel when I play these levels. Retro did it. They made the perfect platformer. There is one level here I'd say is below a 9 out of 10, and only because I suck at it. This game likes to change the camera angle in wacky ways from time to time. It's relatively harmless for the most part, but in this stage the perspective always throws me off, and I never quite know exactly where I can and can't fly through. But yeah, every level offers an exhilarating, unforgettable experience that's just the right length, not so short that its full potential isn't realized, and not so long that the gimmick begins to wear thin. I could tell you how insane Frantic Fields is, the level where you spend most of your time in a tornado jumping across the chunks of earth uprooted in its rampage. Oh, did I mention you also have to dodge lightning? But hearing about it is nothing compared to actually playing it. But screw it, I'm gonna keep talking anyway, which is why I've made a list of my top 5 levels in Tropical Freeze. Ready, set, go. Number 5, Sawmill Thrill. Taking the idea behind Ripsaw Rage from Donkey Kong Country 3 and applying it to a minecart level is genius. The buzzsaws actually carve out the path as you go along. At one point your minecart gets turned into a boat and then back into a minecart. The music is incredibly catchy, it's simply a great level. Number 4, Cliffside Slide. Silhouette theme? Check. Homecoming hijinks as a song? Check. Avalanche that's destroying the very environment you're platforming on? Check. Number 3, Frosty Fruits. This level always makes me crave popsicles and ice cream in general. The return of In a Snowbound Land is an automatic plus. It makes the stage feel super chill, and the ice physics are used in an awesome way where you get bounced around and are taken along for a ride, and you have to duck and leap over things to avoid getting hit. Number 2, Grassland Groove. There's no doubt in my mind that Bright Savannah is the best world in the game, and it starts off incredibly strong. I've already talked about how amazing the music is here, but what makes it better is that everything in this level is synced to the music. The rhythm is infectious, I can't help but get sucked into the jolliness of it all. And do I even need to say it? Look at that background, look at the sky, look at this giraffe. And number 1, Scorch and Torch. The once vibrant and lively savannah is now burning and crumbling beneath your very feet. I simply adore the juxtaposition between these two levels. I like how you have to put out the flames with these water balloons to progress, and although this is kind of dark as far as level gimmicks go, Tropical Freeze's darker tone is something I admire. This has been said many times before, but it's true. Tropical Freeze is Retro's Diddy's Conquest. That game also thrust the Kongs in an unfamiliar setting. That game also had higher stakes. And that game also had more intense stages to reflect the danger of the situation, and they were all the better for it. It's why I love the concept behind the final world, DK Island. It's gone to absolute shit during the time that the Kong family was gone, and I will praise this detail until the day that I die. Each level in this world represents an area from Returns. That means that for people who played that game, they really understand the extent of the damage the Snowmads have done. A brilliant concept executed flawlessly. I don't know what else to say. I don't often say the word perfect and mean it sincerely, but Tropical Freeze's levels are perfect. They're incredibly innovative and push the series forward so far that I don't know how a sequel can possibly top the quality on display here. It's too bad Retro f***ed up the bonus rooms again. Okay, I'll give them this. Despite Rambi and Squawks being the sole two animal buddies yet again, Rambi at the very least actually adds to the levels he's in. To give a quick example, my favorite Rambi level is the last one. This really couldn't be done without his raw strength and fast running speed. Playing as him here adds to the stage's sense of urgency. I'm just glad that they put him in more high energy scenarios like this. The bonus rooms on the other hand managed to be even worse than before, if you could believe it. Now no matter the world you're in, every bonus room shares this generic ass temple aesthetic and background. At least in Returns, the bonus rooms changed their appearance to match the current world's theme. That compliment doesn't mean anything, by the way. It's like comparing one man-made horror to another. I hate both of them. Keeping with things I'm not too keen on, the bosses are both better and worse than in Returns. For the most part, I think they're more fun to face and they put up even more of a fight. Plus, there's no repeats this time. But is it just me, or do some of these go on for too long? The last two bosses specifically, you'll be spending a good chunk of the battle waiting around for an opening. The final boss is the worst when it comes to this, and it doesn't help that he has a ridiculously small hurt box and an attack that I guarantee you will die to the first time you fight him, and you'll have to redo all that hard work. Anyways, back to the bonus rooms. You still get puzzle pieces from completing them that are only useful for unlocking extra artwork. And Kong letters are still the primary collectible and are usually in plain view. Oh yeah, there's also these little figurines that you can buy from Funky's Flying By, and admittedly they're a pretty nice addition. Gives me something to spend my hundreds of banana coins on. So that's it, right? Nothing new in terms of extra content? Well, that would be the case if it weren't for the addition of secret exits, a first for Donkey Kong Country. That level key you would buy in Cranky's shop in Returns, that's not in Tropical Freeze. Instead, Retro decided that it might be a good idea to encourage players to actually explore and have that exploration be more worthwhile than whatever the hell this is. exits. Sadly, this means that stages with secret exits have to be played more than once, one time for each exit like in Super Mario World. These levels are good, but I know this isn't everyone's ideal way of stretching out the total playtime, and it hurts the most when the secret exit is right at the end of a stage. No, scratch that, it hurts the most when you know where the secret exit is but don't have the right Kong. Rock and Relic's secret exit requires a well-timed pogo bounce with Cranky Kong to reach. There's no Kong barrels in this section and you can't backtrack to grab an earlier one after you pass the last checkpoint. So if you lose Cranky here or mess up trying to bounce off of these urchins, you have to exit the stage and try again. In situations like this, it's probably best to get an item from the shop just so you have that extra bit of leeway for making mistakes. Or just use Funky. The post-game follows a very similar structure as last time, it's practically identical. Get all the Kong letters including the ones in the levels unlocked by the secret exits and beat the secret temple levels to unlock the mysterious relics within. After you beat the game and have all the relics, a 7th world is made available to you. Unlike Returns, there's 3 levels in the last world now instead of 1. But unlike Returns 3D, the Switch version of Tropical Freeze didn't add any new ones. Which is a shame, I personally did expect brand new stages when the Switch port was announced. But we got Funky Kong, so do I really have a right to bitch? Instead of Mirror Mode, you unlock Hard Mode after conquering the final secret level. It's Mirror Mode again, only the stage isn't, well, mirrored, but there are 2 key differences. Checkpoints have been removed entirely, so if you get hit once, you're taken right back to the beginning. And now you have the option to choose any Kong you want to play as. So in a way, this is both easier and harder than Mirror Mode from Returns. You aren't restricted to Donkey's basic moveset, but you can't afford to make any errors. If you want to 200% the game, you have to do it on top of collecting the Kong letters all over again. Personally, the ability to use any of the Kongs makes this way more appealing to me than Mirror Mode. I remember I tried to get 200% back when I first played the game on the Wii U. I got as far as World 3 before giving up and potentially breaking my Wii U gamepad out of rage. It's okay, I could always buy another one. That's hilarious. In the past couple of years, Tropical Freeze has gained quite a lot of support from a number of players touting it as one of, if not the best 2D platformer of all time. At the start of this series of videos, I claimed that landing on a definitive best platformer ever made decision is pretty much impossible. It's a title that I believe multiple games are worthy of, and Tropical Freeze is one of them. What DKC 2 is to DKC 1 is exactly what Tropical Freeze is to Returns. A sequel that builds upon the basis of its predecessor, taking what worked and dialing it up to 11. It looks way nicer, it has the better soundtrack, the better gameplay, and the better level design. If Retro Studios ends up making a 3rd Donkey Kong Country game in the future, they have their work cut out for them because topping this will be no easy feat. And with that, we have played through and examined every game in the Donkey Kong Country series. I know we didn't look at the LAN games or 64 or any of the spin-offs, but not only did I think they wouldn't fit very well into the retrospective, I also just didn't have a strong desire to review them at this time. These games though, the main lines, are what I'm really attached to. So real quick, I'd like to rank each of these and share how I stack them up against each other. At the bottom is Donkey Kong Country 3 because of its weak opening and my lack of history with it. Still a good game and I stand by my praises. Donkey Kong Country, the one that started it all. The very first game I ever played, so of course there's a lot of nostalgic bias at play here, but I sincerely believe that it's a quality game to this day. I can never get tired of it. Donkey Kong Country Returns. I have a lot of memories with this one too, and it has some spectacular levels, but those bonus rooms hurt my soul, and it's a little derivative of what came before. That was inevitable considering how long it had been since the last game, but that's just how it is. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Of all these games, I think it nails the platforming aspect the best, and I love having all these different playstyles with the Kongs you can team up with. However, part of what I value about platformers is the pick up and play aspect. Just being able to boot a game up and clear out a level or two in a relatively short amount of time. Tropical Freeze's levels are huge, and I just have to be in a certain mood to replay it. A problem I don't have with the next game. It's as personal as an opinion can get, but that's how I feel. And at the very top, Donkey Kong Country 2. The all-around best in the franchise to me. Literally everything about it is just right. From the killer soundtrack to the creative levels, the cool animal buddies, fun bonus rooms, the engaging post-game, it's probably my favorite 2D platformer ever. This is an excellent series that everyone should play.